Evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Raleigh City Council meeting. First, we have public comment, and I just want to remind everybody about the rules of decorum. Please be kind. First off, please remember to be respectful. And I'm going to ask you to also adhere to the 3-minute time limit. There's a clock there, because I hate to have to interrupt and tell you your time is up. So we are going to start with Christina Jones. And a name and address for the record, please.
Christina Jones, 8005 Finland Drive. I want to clarify that in the last meeting, I asked, what does engagement look like to you? Your response was to ask the city manager when the new community engagement manager started. I am unclear how that response gave residents an answer to my question. After 16 appearances in front of you, I think you are well versed on my questions and concerns. We have about 2 minutes and 40 seconds left of my time, and I would like to open the floor for any questions that you may have of me in order for us to have a conversation instead of me throwing questions at you that you refuse to answer.
I actually do have a question, Christina. Were you on the Wade Hillsborough Street meeting last Wednesday?
It was.
And was there anything on there that you found disturbing?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for asking that. What I heard was the frustration and the anger of the lack of response from anyone in the city to any of the questions. I've been with Mickey Fern on his task force, and the fact that he quit a week ago, the fact that we haven't been able to get any answers to the questions, we had not met with the external team that we were told we were going to meet with, the frustration came out in that meeting, and it turned vicious. It was an uncomfortable meeting to have to listen to, because there was a lot of animosity, but it was justified animosity because it's been a year and a half of unanswered questions. And just like I stated before in my earlier comments, it's been 16 times where I haven't gotten, this is the first time we've had any sort of conversation. And so when there's that much, I can't even think of the word, when there's that much ignoring happening, it leads to that kind of frustration. And I hope that answers it. But if you have more questions, I'd be more than happy to answer that.
Well, normally the public is here to comment. We're not here to comment. I was just curious to see if you had attended that meeting, and describing something as vicious is concerning to me. So, but I have no more questions.
There are other things that I had that are vicious. I mean, I think I'm not going to go into tit for tat of what I find during city council that's vicious as well. There were things that were said, but they were not lies. They were not untrue statements. And I understand your rules of decorum.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Going forward, we will not be responding to anything like that. This is time for the public to speak, not for us to speak. So thank you. Next, we have Sergey Cassell.
Mayor, I do not see Sergey on the call.
Okay, Polina Voronsky.
See her on the call either. Yeah, Mayor, I don't see either of them on the call.
Okay, Hua Huang.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hua Huang, 7401 Ebenezer Church Road, 27612. Under normal circumstances, this month the city of Raleigh should be having their election, but due to issues with the census, there becomes a need to delay the municipal election in Raleigh due to the time needed to redraw districts. But that's not what me and many of my colleagues who are with me tonight are upset about. For months, People are approached the city to ask the city's decision on the election, and the city provided no answer until later this summer. Not only did the city move the election to next November, the city essentially removed the runoff process, making the election based on plurality vote. That's a major setback on the democratic process, and it's one thing that none of the local media seems inclined to discuss because the local news is so caught up in making excuses for current leadership that they focus on justifying the delay and spend almost no time justifying the regression of the voting system backwards from having a runoff to a plurality. It would be a different story if the city Raleigh introduced ranked choice voting, but clearly even that's not taken into consideration. What's further upsetting is the lack of transparency, lack of public input, and a lot of behind-the-scenes action done by the city. This is a poor example of leadership behavior goes down the chain of command. This is seen with the Raleigh Housing Authority and the Planning Commission making plans to rezone and displace Black community like Heritage Park, claiming that they have talked to the residents. So what's the metric to indicate support for the proposed changes? What's the information that's been given to the residents? Why does the RHA and the property manager insist on only meeting residents on one-on-one basis instead of actually meeting as a group? If the goal is to isolate people and cornering them to agreeing with you, that's not engagement that cities should be encouraging. There's no real dialogue. The Housing Justice Coalition, Wake County, spoke with the residents and came out for the fact that they are not informed of the changes that's happening. So how can a city claim that they speak for the people? One thing is clear, the changes, the improvement, the so-called progress that the city is making, none of that is meant for the current Black residents in the community. That's the only explanation for why the city staff never thought to reach out to the Black community. Wake County Housing Justice Coalition isn't asking affordable for who anymore when it comes to housing. We know who all of this is affordable to. It's affordable to them, to the wealthier non-Black people who are being invited by the city to push out the current residents. I could go on, but I will let my colleagues from Wake County Housing Justice Coalition and Raleigh Democratic Socialists of America to pick up where I left off. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Cole McMullen.
Cole McMullen, 10730 Foremost Drive, Raleigh 27617. Today marks the day the Raleigh municipal election was supposed to occur had it not been delayed by the 2020 census and redistricting. While there are certainly circumstances beyond the control of Raleigh City Council, it is false to claim that Raleigh City Council had no choice but to postpone the election all the way to November. Many municipalities in North Carolina tied their elections to the spring primary, providing flexibility for the redistricting process to be finished, while also respecting the law and the constitutional process of redistricting. However, Raleigh City Council went a step further by eliminating the possibility for a runoff election, making it possible that winners of the next election will not hold a majority of the vote. While runoff elections are costly, inefficient, and typically have reduced voter turnout, it is possible for the city to alter its election format to a ranked choice voting format in which voters rank their candidates by order of preference. In a ranked choice voting election, a candidate is not declared the winner unless they receive a majority of the vote, that being at least 50% plus one vote. If a candidate fails to receive a majority of the vote in the first round, an instant runoff is triggered and the candidate with the least amount of votes is eliminated. The votes of the eliminated candidate are then transferred to the voter's second ranked choice. This process continues until the candidate receives a majority of the vote. Much of the voting machine software currently in use is already compatible with ranked choice voting, saves time and money compared to a traditional runoff election, and is much more democratic than traditional plurality elections. Raleigh City Council could have sent a request to the state legislature for ranked choice voting to be used in the next election. Instead, they chose to eliminate the possibility for a runoff, potentially allowing a candidate that does not have majority support to sit on the next council. This regressive decision by council is both concerning and disappointing, and I would like to see them ask the study group that has been looking at council terms and salaries, etc., to look into a possible ranked choice voting election format, as well as also possibly altering from a district municipal election format to a proportional representation. But I don't have time to describe proportional representation. I'll have to do that sometime else. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Wanda Gilbert Coker.
Wanda is not on the call, Mayor.
Okay, next we have Larry Helfont.
Larry, go ahead. Larry, you just muted yourself. Larry, if you're talking, we cannot hear you. Mayor, maybe we can move on to the next and let Larry disconnect and come back in and see if that fixes audio problems.
Okay, we will do that. So next on our list is Kimberly Mukhtarian.
Kimberly is not on the call.
Next we have Allison Anthony.
Also not on the call.
Doug Johnston.
Doug, you're really low. Doug, I don't think we can hear you at all. Maybe we'll get Doug to disconnect and reconnect as well.
Okay, next we have Brian Burnett.
Good evening, Brian Burnett, 2537 Diamond Hitch Trail. Good evening, City of Raleigh, Madam Mayor, City Council. Again, I am respectfully submitting a request based on my last ask at last City Council. My proposal is to preserve rent-ready historic structure that, if destroyed or left to market forces, will remove existing naturally occurring affordable housing suitable for up to 4 families, i.e. single mothers, senior citizens, working adults. Since the initial presentation or request, the NNO recently published an article titled, "Where Do They Think I'm Going to Stay?" And I'm not sure who they is. However, that title has stuck with me ever since I read it the other day. And so I'm going to make sure that we remember that title. Where do they think I'm going to stay? The goals of this is to preserve, again, existing affordable housing for seniors, working adults, single parents in a prime Southeast Raleigh location adjacent to downtown. Again, where do they think I'm going to stay? My modified ask, which is different from my initial ask, was that I respectfully request the council to authorize city staff to research a possible temporary placement of real property on 424 and 428 South Bloodworth Street for the purpose of relocating the existing house currently located at 501 South Bloodworth Street in order to preserve historic in character affordable housing representative of Southeast Raleigh. Again, temporarily. But where do they think I'm going to stay? Things that I've come to understand since my last ask was that I understand that a contract license is not possible for affordable housing. I understand that zoning for an intended due to current zoning use is not possible for affordable housing. I understand that a private sale of readily available city-owned property is not possible for affordable housing. I understand that a permanent license of conveyance to preserve affordable housing is not possible. I wonder what is possible for affordable housing if you want to be a part of the solution versus the complaining. I'm from Southeast Raleigh, and I've witnessed years of disinvestment, and I've witnessed countless people in my community that have only offered problems, and I'm here to offer a solution, and I'm here to offer a solution that I will invest in personally, and it seems that it's an uphill battle. I'm a little guy. I'm from the community. However, I'm not able to assist my community directly. I am not about finger pointing. I'm about creating solutions. If I don't have bootstraps, I'm about building my own bootstraps. If we cannot receive minimal city assistance for this property, keeping this property and the others affordable may not be possible. We will not let these properties go to waste. We'll not let them be condemned.
Brian,
Yes.
your 3 minutes are up.
Okay.
Thank you. I am going to refer this to staff and please get back to us in the manager's report on options. And if we could have some creative thinking here, this would be helpful. Thank you.
Have a staff report that will be in this Friday's manager's update.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Beth, has anybody who is not on joined
Yeah,
us?
so Larry has rejoined and so has Douglas. So let's start off with Larry.
Okay,
Larry, are you there? Larry, we cannot hear you. Larry, why don't you hang up? I've got your phone number. I will dial you back in and we'll spin over to Douglas. I'll just phone you from the meeting.
okay, next we have Doug Johnston.
No, Doug, you still sound so far away. Can anybody else hear him?
Find out
Oh,
from
good.
Larry what he did.
Can y'all hear him better that way? What he just said was a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Is this better? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, Doug, just speak a little louder. We can hear you.
Okay,
Well-
I'm Doug Johnson, 120 Forest Road, and the Greenway Master Plan is my topic. It's fabulous, detailed, right on target, 5-star functionality, but I'm concerned about appearance now. Greenway look. Today, you go there, spot, but I look to either side, it's green, looks great, it's attractive, well, it's functional. It's on its way to a depth by 1,000 cuts. I didn't leave these slides, thanks. Take the slides down.
Larry, hold on Doug, hold on one second. Clerk, these comments were submitted to us, weren't they?
That is correct. I was about to indicate you received a copy of his comments late this afternoon. And
Right.
I'll make sure they're a part of the record, and you have received them.
Okay.
That's great. Goodbye, everyone. Get to work.
Doug, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
We have Larry now, hopefully.
Okay. Larry?
Oh, Mayor, I'm so sorry. He's on the call, but I don't understand why we can't hear him.
Okay. Well, let's move on and let's see if we can try to get him on during another break. Let's go to this next we'll start the public hearing. We'll see if maybe after the first two we can get him on. All right, so the first item is the street name change from Denise Drive to Capitol Center Drive. No one has signed up to speak for or against this.
Good evening, Council. My name is Donetta Powell. I'm with Transportation Planning. For the Denise Drive street name change request, we've had no one sign up to speak. No one seems to be opposed to this, but we do want to hold the public hearing open until the October 19th council meeting to discuss the matter with one of the property owners. To give a little background on this, Denise Drive name change request was initiated in August of 2021 from Jones Franklin Road to Capitol Center Drive. As part of the Jones Franklin Road interchange improvement, Denise Drive has been superseded by the extension of Capitol Center Drive, which impacted approximately 3 parcels. The map illustrated shows the 3 parcels that are impacted by the change and the extension of Capitol Center Drive up to Jones Franklin Road. And this is actually a picture of the improvements that have been done to Capitol Center Drive. And our recommendation is to approve the street name change. However, we do want to hold the public hearing open until the October 19th City Council meeting.
Okay,
Any questions?
hold on one second. Let me, it's on grid. Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, I would like to understand what the concerns of the property owner are that will be discussed over the coming weeks.
Okay.
Do you mind putting the map back up again, please? Good evening, Eric Lamb with the city's transportation department. We were contacted this morning by the property owner at 5301, which is the street on the end. I'm sorry, the parcel that's on the very end. It's an interesting situation that when DOT, if I can get the graphic back up. There we go. So we're talking about the parcel that's on the end here. And as you can see, when DOT constructed this portion of Capitol Center Drive, this parcel no longer has frontage along Capitol Center. But what we just found out was that DOT actually built a short segment of street on the end. And so the property owners asked if they can look at keeping things the same as they are right now. So there's a little bit of research we have to do on that and a little bit of conversation we need to have with the property owner. So if you don't mind, we'd like to keep this hearing up until the next council meeting, please.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, if we could take the presentation down, thank you. I am going to open the hearing and I'll leave the hearing open and we will take this up on our October 19th meeting. Do we need a vote on that, City Attorney?
Probably best.
Okay, do we have a motion? Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, seconded by Councilmember Fort. All in favor? Okay. Unanimous, Clerk. Thank you. Beth, is Larry still trying to connect with us?
I'm trying to work that out with him right now. If you can move on to the second one, I want to try to get him just on the phone and not the computer and the phone.
Okay, thank you. All right, next is street improvements for Granville Drive. We have 4 people who've signed up to speak in support and 1 in opposition. First, we'll hear from staff.
Good evening, Council. My name is Diana Powell. I'm with Transportation Planning. I'm here to present the public hearing for the Granville Drive Street and Sidewalk Improvement Petition. These are petitioned improvements by the property owners along Granville Drive from Glenwood Avenue to Transylvania Avenue. Okay. Just to give you a little background about our street improvement petitions. Petitions issued for local streets upon request by the citizens. Assessments for curb and gutter are $32 per linear foot for residential frontage. Complete Streets policy requires sidewalk. Only property owners can sign the petition, being a majority of the property owners, also representing a majority of the frontage being improved. Our street and sidewalk prioritization methodology ranked this with 12 points. We determined the proximity to a school, which was 2 points, proximity to a park, community center, library, greenway with 2 points, proximity to transit service was 2 points, sidewalk connectivity was 1 point, evidence of foot traffic were no points. However, we did have contact from many property owners that were uncomfortable walking in the street. Existing sidewalk on one side, 5 points. Lake County vulnerability, no points. The years since successful petition were no points, had not been petitioned before. Pedestrian crashes, no point. Estimated cost effectiveness, 0 points, and project partnering, no points at this point in time. This map shows the general vicinity of where Granville Drive is off of Glenwood Avenue. This is in Council District E. The scope of the project and project length is approximately 2,960 linear feet, which is actually 5,591.19 feet along both sides of the street. 27-foot wide street with curb and gutter along both sides is what we're recommending, with a 5-foot wide sidewalk on a 3.5-foot setback from the curb on the west side. The estimated cost of construction is $4.3 million. The assessment for this would be $32 per linear foot, with an estimated total assessments of $119,630. This map illustrates where we are proposing to construct the improvements along Granville Drive up to Transylvania Avenue. And the blue shows the existing sidewalks in that area, and the green will be existing greenway trails. The statistics for this petition were that we petitioned 40 property owners, with 26 signed petitions coming back in, with 22 of those being in favor and 4 being opposed. Out of the total of 5,591 feet, 2,963 of the property frontage linear footage was in favor of the improvements. This is a map illustrating the parcels that are impacted by these improvements and the property owners that responded with a yes or a no vote. And now I'll take any questions.
Okay, do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Knight?
I got a question. Thank you for your presentation. I think that was very helpful. Why did the petition ask for the sidewalk or the curb and gutter to go all the way to Forsyth? It stopped sort of halfway down Granville, you could argue, and then it goes for another, a very long block to Forsyth where the road actually ends. Was there any conversation around having the sidewalk go the whole length of Granville Drive?
Yes, sir, there was. Our policy allows for citizens to petition for 1 block increments or on one section of a street. So we stopped the improvements where there are some existing improvements at 352 Transylvania Avenue where there's curb there. We did not extend it all the way to Forsyth Street. However, we did pose the question to some of the citizens that live along that section, and they elected to not participate in the petition and did not want to petition for improvements from Transylvania down to Forsyth at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any additional questions? Okay, I am going to open the public hearing. We have 4 people signed up to speak in support. This will be 8 minutes per side. 1 person signed up opposed. So we have Robert Cato, Nick Fountain, Lauren Wells, and Royce Burns speaking in favor. You have 8 minutes total, so I would try and be respectful and keep your comments to 2 minutes each so you all share the time. Beth, who do we have first?
I believe we have Bob Cato first.
Okay.
Okay, am I on?
You are.
Okay, this is Bob Cato. I live at 3040 Granville Drive and speak to you in favor of installing a sidewalk on Granville Drive. I want to thank the city staff, particularly Donetta Powell, for putting the proposal together and answering many, many questions. The primary reasons I support a sidewalk have to do with safety, community spirit, and improved property values. Granville Drive is a busy, narrow, curved, hilly street used as a cut-through from Glenwood Avenue to North Hills. The shoulder of the road is uneven and dangerous to walk on. I have communicated with 30 of the 40 affected Granville Drive owners and learned the following. At least 21 children younger than college age now live on Granville Drive, way more than any time in the 31 years I've lived there. 10 of the 11 households with those children indicated to me they want a sidewalk. 10 of the 12 households with a retired or semi-retired resident indicated to me they wanted a sidewalk. Many adults of all ages like to walk or jog for exercise or stroll their babies. A sidewalk will increase the sense of community by encouraging residents to walk along Granville Drive and be more likely to interact with their neighbors. The sidewalk will be a step towards eventually connecting homes, Root Elementary, and Glenwood Village Shopping Center. AARP says the sidewalk significantly increases the value of a property. Most people want to live in a walkable community. So a sidewalk increases safety, improves community spirit, and increases property values. Please authorize the construction of the sidewalk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cato. Next, we have Nick Fountain.
Members of the council, I'm Nick Fountain. I live at 3056 Granville, a Raleigh historic landmark. I concur in the comments of Mr. Cato. And I must say that after the public comment session, I sometimes wonder if you haven't had all the fun you can stand. But as to this matter, we had public meetings before the pandemic. Then we did the balloting. The city has a well-organized process to get the input of the public in the neighborhood in particular. All that has been done. The vote has been in favor. The process is played out, and the neighborhood is in favor. We need to move ahead. We now have speed bumps there. The average speed used to be, there's a double yellow line down that street, and the average speed used to be 42 miles an hour. It's now in the low 30s. That's still pretty fast considering the baby strollers, the young kids trying to learn to ride bicycles, the joggers, the walkers. None of them are safe at the moment. I'm an empty nester. So is Mr. Cato. At least one of the other speakers is as well. But we need to do this for the sake of the children. And the reality is there is a city park at the end of the street adjacent to Pasquotank, a short block from the end of this proposed improvement. We think it'll be a material benefit to the neighborhood to have this walk carry all the way down to the park, since that is a destination for a lot of the dog walkers and others that we see going by our property. We think this neighborhood can afford it, and we think we need to move forward with it. We ask your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fountain. Next, we have Lauren Wells.
Thank you, City Council. This is Lauren Brett Wells. I am a resident at 3009 Granville Drive. I would like to thank everybody for the hard work you've done to this point to get this sidewalk petition moving forward. I'm just going to give kind of a personal story. I am a Raleigh business owner, but most importantly, I'm a daddy of 2 toddlers on the street. I came from Bloomsbury Estate downtown, where there were just sidewalks everywhere. And when my daughter was born, you know, we would take her for walks on the sidewalk. It was a great sense of community. We really enjoyed being able to walk everywhere. And just a quick story, when I moved into Granville in July of 2019, you know, we wanted to do a little Christmas party and invite the neighborhood. So we took the stroller with our daughter. She was around 1 at the time. And we just walked the neighborhood to hand out invitations and put them in people's mailboxes. You know, as we were walking the street, we were looking behind us as cars were darting by. There are all kinds of blind corners, hills, and it was pretty terrifying with our little girl in the stroller. So we only made it to about half the street. We came back, we parked the stroller, and that was the last time we've walked the neighborhood with our kids, because it's just way too dangerous with all the cars and the narrow roads to do it. You know, I would love to have more of a community, be able to speak with my neighbors and see everyone. We're outgoing people. We've got young kids. I know there's a lot of families in the neighborhood my kids have never met, and it's simply because our road is way too dangerous. So I would love a better sense of community with sidewalks that we experience when we live downtown. and that so many other neighborhoods have, just so my little ones can enjoy it and meet their neighbors, and we can have a better sense of community. So not a whole bunch of technical reasons, just wanted to give some personal experience why this vote's so important to me, and I really hope you guys vote in favor so that we could get this moved through. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Next, we have Royce Burns.
Hi, this is Royce Burns, 3066 Granville Drive. My wife Julie and I proposed the street improvements on Granville, and we do appreciate our neighbors' concerns about their property, and we do hope that the city engineers will work with them to make sure there's minimal disruptions. But the proposed improvements will be a big benefit for our community and will greatly improve the safety of walking on Granville. We walk to Root Elementary School, and there are no curbs and no gutters and no sidewalks along 90% of our route. Wake County Public Schools sets the no bus boundary based on distance, but not safety or walkability. They said that walker safety is a city issue. So we're stuck in a not my problem between the county schools and the city of Raleigh. While the speed bumps on Granville help, walking along the road with kids and no safe distance from cars is treacherous. Some days cars zip by us and construction vehicles force us over into the ditch. If we were to drive instead, we'd be stuck in a long line of cars, add to traffic congestion, and increase carbon emissions. We started this petition so our kids and neighbors could walk safely, and we compartmentalized what we could accomplish, which was our stretch along Granville. Our larger goal would be more improvements in our neighborhood so more children can walk to Root, and improvements on Glenwood so our neighborhood teens can walk to Oberlin, and so our neighbors can walk to Glenwood Village. We'd like to thank the council for their time and consideration and hope this is the beginning of a broader pedestrian safety improvements for the city.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burns. Next, we have speaking in opposition, Jay Easterling.
Mayor, Jay is not on the call.
Okay. All right. I am going then to close the hearing. Councilmember Knight, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just when you're ready, I'd like to have one question and then a few comments before we go forward.
Why don't you go?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. This process started long before I got on council, but this is in my neighborhood basically, and I'm on that road either driving or biking probably every day, and I see it firsthand. It is a dangerous road, even with the speed bumps in there. It's tight, very tight, and it does, certainly dissuade folks from walking and riding their bikes along this road. So this will be a great improvement. I am interested in, I guess, Mr. Burns, you may be the best one to answer this, and I appreciate you, Mr. Cato and Fountain and Wells being on tonight. From a neighbor's perspective, why do you think it wasn't the petition didn't go all the way to Forsyth Road?
Again, city staff cut the improvements off.
And I was asking from a neighbor's perspective. So you're saying they didn't have that. I just didn't know if they had asked people themselves as neighbors, not from the staff perspective. That's what I was asking Mr. Burns, if he had any thoughts on that.
Excuse me.
Just to be muted.
Oh, there I am. Yeah, so I will say that the process by which the improvements and the petition process as a whole is quite onerous. And I did have discussion with the few people that we knew farther down the road on Granville, and sort of described the process to them. And they mentioned that they were for it initially, but it just didn't seem to get off the ground after that. And so, being new to the neighborhood, we decided to stick with what we thought we could accomplish. But we do hope that if we do pass and we can set an example for the rest of the neighborhood, and increase pedestrian safety through the whole neighborhood.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, more sidewalks are needed. And I do understand that the process is going to change somewhat in how we go about this. Mr. East, I talked to Mr. Easterling this morning by phone, and he said he could not be on tonight. I think his maybe a personal attorney sent some comments for the record to us this afternoon. So those are for the record. And I do know that Mr. Easterling has some concerns specific to his property. And I told him his voice has been heard and it will continue to be heard through this process. So just want to make sure that Mr. Easterling's specific issue is part of this as we go forward. And I know it will be. So I appreciate that. And Madam Mayor, I'm ready to move.
You just went on mute.
Sorry, once you pass it, whenever you'd like for me to make a motion, I'd be glad to. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any additional questions? Okay, please make your motion, Councilmember Knight.
All right, I'm gonna go back and forth. I don't actually see, I guess I moved to adopt a resolution authorizing the improvements with the understanding assessments would apply for the curb and gutter improvements only. Is that it?
Seconded by Councilmember Buffkin. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Clerk? Thank you. Next, we have rezoning Z1021 Creedmoor Road.
Excuse me, Mayor, would you like to try to circle back to Larry real quick?
Yes, please. He's there.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Larry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, hallelujah. Thank you for your patience this evening. Not sure where the problem is, but, well, we'll figure it out later. Mayor, shortly after you took office, you created a strategic plan for the next 5 years. This plan addressed the needs of the community and the focal points of this administration. The plan is sound and addresses many of the needs of your electorate. It is the execution of this plan that causes concern. I want to bring your attention to 2 areas of the strategic plan: the safe, vibrant, and healthy communities, and affordable housing. I follow the monthly meetings of the Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Communities Committee that you administer to see if there is any progress to address areas of this plan. Of late, the meeting seems to be tied up with rezoning issues such as Z5320, where you are trying to negotiate an amicable settlement between the developer and the residents. I may be mistaken, but I think this rezoning has been continued since it was first brought to council in June and has been the subject of your committee since then. It's a basic problem that plagues many rezoning efforts in Raleigh: infrastructure deficiencies and development location. Here's a novel idea. Why don't we address and fix the infrastructure problem first before you decide on future rezoning approval? It would be a win-win for the adjoining residents and for Raleigh. However, rezoning issues are not what this committee was created for, nor is it an objective of the strategic plan. I'm sure that the public would love an explanation as to why this case has occupied so much of your time and continues to be on the agenda for the Safe, Vibrant, Healthy Communities Committee when so many other issues are more pressing in today's times. One of the primary objectives of the Safe, Vibrant, Healthy Committee is to promote a clean, engaged community environment where people feel safe and enjoy access to affordable housing and community amenities that support a high quality of life. In reality, homes are being condemned and people are being evicted or selling their homes because they have no choice. Where is the city's role in this? Do you have a plan to combat continued gentrification or a means to keep housing affordable? I know that you think you're addressing the problem by spending taxpayer money. While the recent move of buying a hotel seems like an answer, it is only a partial solution. With the recent move of buying a hotel, seems like the answer. Who's going to manage the hotel and how are you going to keep it affordable? These are questions that need to be answered. Please give affordable housing a higher priority in committee or council. Bottom line, please refocus your energy on the strategic plan and develop policies and guidance to improve the lives of all residents at all income levels. When you spend money, it should be for an integral part of the need to meet those goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just so you know, the next step is finding a management firm to run the hotel, and that is a top priority of our team. So thank you. All right. Next, we're going to go to rezoning Z1021 Creedmoor Road.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council. Z1021 was in front of you at your last meeting. This is a request to rezone just under 7 acres from R4. There's a couple of changes to the petition since you saw this last. The applicant has reduced the maximum, the base district from RX7 to RX5, and they have also modified conditions. This is still consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and the Planning Commission did recommend approval. And I believe we have the applicant on the phone tonight to answer questions for you that you might have for the applicant. I would just note that the condition changes here, the most significant thing, I'll call out a couple of changes. One, the reduction in maximum allowed height from 7 stories to 5. They have also modified their conditions, numbers 3, 4, have added accessory structures as well as principal buildings to the prohibition in the buffers on in conditions 3 and 4, and then in the condition about transition yard, they have made the exception that where tree conservation is established, so they've established a 75-foot buffer there, and then just acknowledging that if tree conservation is established, they wouldn't be planting there. So those are the significant changes there in the conditions. I'm happy to answer questions for you about the case, or you can hear from the applicant. And I believe the speaking time for the public hearing was exhausted, so any additional public comment you might want to take, I know there are folks signed up to speak, but any additional comment you would take would be at your discretion.
Yes, so I was going to ask for 4 additional minutes per side if we have concurrence from council on that. We good? Okay, I see nodding and thumbs up. Thank you. Okay, so we will open this up. If we could get the countdown timer on, this will be 4 minutes per side. Speaking in support is the applicant, Collier Marsh, Eric Bell, Norman Glazier are on the line. Whoever is going to speak, I'm guessing it's Collier. If you could, okay, there we go.
Okay, good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. Again, this is Collier Marsh with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. Bynum did a great job of summarizing the updates to our rezoning and some substantial updates to our proposal here. Since the Planning Commission vote, we've continued to work with our surrounding neighbors extensively. We have made substantial updates to this rezoning to address those neighborhood concerns. In fact, we've reached an agreement with those neighbors that we previewed to the council at the last meeting that's reflected in the updated conditions that Bynum just previewed. And tonight we're also offering one additional update to help alleviate some concerns of those neighbors. So this slide here summarizes the updates to our proposal as it stood before Planning Commission. Again, based on these lengthy discussions and numerous meetings we've had with neighbors and that final agreement we reached. So as Bynum noted, we changed the designation from RX7 to RX5. As council may recall, with the RX7 proposal, we had conditioned height to 6 stories. So what this means is we're further reducing the height down to 5 stories with this new proposal. Based on our discussions with the neighbors, we also agreed to reduce the maximum number of residential units from 325 to 300. And this is the one additional place where I wanted to provide an update for council. Although we'd had extensive discussions with neighbors, we understood that there's still just some lingering concerns about overall density. So what we'd like to propose tonight is a further reduction of that 300 units to 295 units. So we've also made substantial changes to our proposed buffers. The northern buffer, the northern property line, increased to a 75-foot no-build zone. We've added a bunch of additional plantings, increased the fence and wall height from 6.5 feet to 8 feet. The eastern buffer is even more substantial with a 100-foot no-building zone, 100-foot no driveway zones, substantial added plantings again, and increased fence and wall height. We've also added 4 new conditions that are summarized on the slide we're looking at here. We've added a 40-foot tree conservation area commitment along that entire eastern boundary. We've added commitments to shield lighting in the exterior and to reduce the permitted light pole height. And then we've committed to screening the eastern facade of any parking decks. The last condition, it says internal dumpster storage. That's a very specific condition, but essentially what that means is that trash facilities for this project would be collected internal to the building, compacted, and then only moved to the exterior for collection. So to eliminate any unsightly trash facilities or disturbance to the neighbors. So again, we've made substantial changes to this rezoning. We worked with neighbors very diligently, and we respectfully request that with the final submission of these conditions, which we hope to have signed for consideration at the next meeting, that the council will vote to approve our rezoning.
Thank you. Okay, next, Collier, is your side finished speaking?
Yes, we are finished. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have signed up to speak in opposition Emmett Haywood, Stephen Newton, Essex Taylor, and Doyle Parrish. Is anybody on the line who would like to speak?
Essex, I have you unmuted if you would like to start off. There, let me try Stephen. Stephen and Essex seem to be the only two that are on for this item. Stephen, are you there?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is Steve Newton. I'm an attorney at Nichols and Crampton in Raleigh and work with them at Haywood. And we, agree with what Collier just said. We represent one of the property owners and have been assisting other owners with trying to keep them informed with the process. We've had some diligent conversations with Mr. Marsh and his client, and the owners were very concerned with the original conditions. We think we've made a lot of progress with the updated conditions, and feel like we're a lot better off than where we started. I do not believe, I think Mr. Parrish was having some technical difficulties, so I think he wanted to make a few comments, but I don't think he's able to. And I think Mr. Taylor, who is one of the adjacent owners, is really here just to listen in.
Okay, thank you. Beth, did Mr. Parrish ever call in?
No, the email on his sign up is not any of the emails that have been communicating with us. So I think it was somewhere else. I can have the meeting try to call him real quick to see if he will answer and join that way if you would like.
Well, we just heard from the attorney, Stephen Newton. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. We have, let's see. Councilmember Buffkin, this is your district. I am going to have to close the hearing so new conditions can be submitted. Are you okay with that step?
Yes, Mayor, I think that'd be appropriate.
And I did talk to Mr. Parrish this afternoon by telephone, and I think we're very close to an agreement on this one, council members. And after closing the hearing tonight, as you heard Mr. Marshall send us new signed conditions so that we can have this case back in 2 weeks.
Okay. All right, I will then close the public hearing, and this will be on our agenda in 2 weeks. And Bynum, they have until Friday to submit conditions?
Yes, ma'am. For you all to be able to act at the next meeting, we would need revised conditions, which Mr. Marsh indicated that we're going to make some additional revisions, and also all signatures from property owners.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we have rezoning Z1821 Boylan Avenue. No one has signed up to speak in opposition to this case. So we'll hear.
Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart had her hand up. I'm not sure if that was something related to the last matter.
It was. It's okay, Councilmember Ford. I appreciate it.
Hey, sorry, I did not see her hand up. Councilmember Stewart, do you want to say something?
No, I'll let it go.
Okay, thank you. All right, Bynum?
Yes, ma'am. Rezoning Z1821 is located on North Boylan Avenue. This is a request to rezone just under half an acre from office mixed use 3-story height limit with a detached frontage and an NCOD to office mixed use with a 7-story height limit, urban limited frontage, conditions, and a TOD. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. So this is at the southwest corner of Jones and Boylan. There are a couple of buildings on the site currently, and they have provided the applicant has provided some conditions here. They have prohibited a handful of uses, provided screening for roof-mounted mechanical equipment, provided additional parking deck screening, and some specifications about deck lighting, and also limited the building height to 95 feet. So the change here is a significant increase in residential unit entitlement. The setbacks, the front setback changes because of the frontage, but other setbacks do not change. And the office square footage increases significantly, as does the retail square footage entitlement. This is consistent with the future land use map, and also with the urban form map, consistent with the plan overall. A couple of inconsistent policies around infill compatibility and neighborhood identity. And that is my presentation. Again, Planning Commission votes in favor. It is consistent with the plan and the future land use map. I know we have the applicant signed up to speak, and while there is no one from the public signed up to speak, you did receive written comments, which the clerk has forwarded to you. What questions could I answer for you before you open the hearing?
Any questions? Okay, I will then open the hearing. Who do we have here to speak and support? Beth?
We have them all. I will start off with maybe Toby.
Hey, good evening, Mayor and council members. This is Toby Coleman with Smith Anderson here on behalf of the applicant. I believe from the echo that y'all can hear me, but please stop me if you can't. I do have a short presentation, and I've also reached out to you individually. I guess I would ask the council members, rather than me going on a full presentation, if you all feel like you have what you need, we are happy to. I'm happy to keep it relatively short. I think that really the only issue here, obviously this is a request for an increase in height. I think the main issue here is it is a change. We're moving a property from the North Boylan NCOD. There are some unique circumstances here that we believe make it appropriate, and I believe the Planning Commission unanimously recommended approval, so they also agreed with that.
Yeah, there is no one here to speak in opposition, so I would encourage you to do a very brief presentation.
Sure. So if we could, so this is here's a picture of the site. As you can see, it's currently, the owner of the property is Dr. Robert Williamson, who's also on the call along with the rest of the development team. Dr. Williamson has his dental practice in that red house there. He has been there, he's had his dental practice there for about 17 years. He is looking to redevelop the site both to keep his dental practice there in a way that's feasible as costs go up. As you can see, the property is at the southern end of the NCOD in a block that is not fully covered by the NCOD, so removing it would not negatively impact the NCOD. One thing to note is this is a unique NCOD in that it is not necessarily associated with a residential, your typical residential neighborhood. Instead, it's a very small set of blocks on the western edge of downtown that's not necessarily associated with what many people think of as a neighborhood. I, in fact, lived on the 200 block of North Boylan, didn't even realize there was a neighborhood called North Boylan until I ran across this case. One of the things that we found in looking at this is both that you've got a lot of existing density that's happened since this NCOD was created in 1998, which is important, but also that the NCOD was originally created really to reduce suburbanization of an area that was urban, that was pre-war urban. So the concern was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, this area, as homes were converted into businesses, parking lots were going in front of homes. And so a lot of the conditions in the NCOD are to retain the streetscape. That's what's happening here, and we are going to retain that. The only thing we're requesting a change from is the height standards. The NCOD limits height to 40 feet. Happy to answer any questions that you may have, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any questions of the applicant? Okay, not hearing any, I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Fort.
Thank you, Mayor. I've had an opportunity to talk to folks in the Boylan Avenue area and have not really received any major concerns about the project from the immediate neighbors adjacent to the project. So I'm ready to make a motion unless there's some comments or questions from other council members. All right.
Councilmember Melton has already seconded it, so.
Well, I gotta read it first.
Actually, Mayor, I was gonna add that I spoke to some neighbors as well, and I think that their concerns were regarding keeping the spirit of the NCOD with the street frontage and some of the other requirements that I think have been met in these conditions, and I haven't heard anything since, and so I support the motion. I'm ready to second it at the appropriate time.
Okay, Councilmember Fort.
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 5th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Seconded by Councilmember Melton again. All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, clerk, that passes unanimously. Next, we have rezoning Z 2021 Reedy Creek Road. I'm going to ask to be recused from this. My former employer is one of 3 contractors working on this project, and I would just feel more comfortable not voting on this and would ask to be recused.
So moved.
All right, second by Councilmember Melton. All in favor? I cannot see everybody. If there's anybody who is opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, clerk, that passes unanimously. I am going to go on mute, stop my video, and I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem to take over the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're just going to hand it over to Ms. Walter.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. So this is a request to rezone just over 34 acres from office mixed use 3-story height limit and office mixed use 5-story height limit in urban limited frontage to a single general use district with no frontage of commercial mixed use 12-story height limit. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Planning Commission voted to recommend approval, and they evaluated the future land use map designation as consistent here. So this is the site. We're across the west side of Blue Ridge from the North Carolina Museum of Art. This is a state-owned site. They are positioning to redevelop for new headquarters for the Department of Health and Human Services. A couple of views of the site from street level. So the change here is pretty significant. The residential entitlement, the office square footage, the retail entitlement, all going up significantly. The setback is changing modestly on the front. Again, inconsistent with the urban form map because it doesn't include a frontage. And inconsistent with the plan overall, although Planning Commission did find the request consistent with the future land use map. So there are a number of consistent policies here, a handful of inconsistent. So there's some, just a handful of things here around corridor development, pedestrian-friendly and greenway-oriented development, the frontage issue that I raised earlier, also parking structures and the design guidelines, and also parking lot siting. So with the absence of the frontage, that's triggering a lot of this. So again, Planning Commission does recommend approval, and I would be happy to answer questions. I believe you have the applicant signed up to speak and also a member of the public in opposition.
Does council have any questions for Ms. Walter or staff? All right, seeing none, we will open the public hearing. We have 6 people signed up in support: Jamie Schwedler, Jeff Murison, Mark Frederick, Bill Johnson, Chris Roberts, and Brian Purdy. So we'll have 8 minutes for each side. Beth, if we can, I would imagine, start with Jamie Schwedler.
Yes, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart and members of the council. This is Jamie Schwedler with Parker Poe, 301 Fayetteville Street, here on behalf of the applicant. I'm joined by Will Johnson from the State Department of Administration, Chris Roberts, Velis 3P, and Brian Purdy of McAdams. Also with us is Mr. Jeff Murison, the Executive Director of the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance, who will express his support at the remaining time. This rezoning case is filed in conjunction with an administrative site plan for phase 1 of the project, which will allow DHHS employees currently working on the Dorothea Dix property to relocate here. And this will clear the way for the city's plans for Dix Park and allow for major reinvestment into an underutilized state property in the heart of Blue Ridge Corridor. This slide shows the history behind the project, which goes back to 2015 when the state conveyed the Dix Park property to the city, and a legislative mandate was issued to consolidate the DHHS offices into one headquarters. The conveyance of the Dix property triggered the expiration of leases housing 2,500 employees on Dix, leading the state to search for new locations for a headquarters and the General Assembly to authorize the funding and the rezoning type issued here before you. Zoning and site plan review was sought this year to meet that deadline of opening in 2025 to house the relocated employees. Next slide, please. The Department of Administration, DHHS, and the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance created guiding principles for this project shown here, which focus on keeping the forested area at the center of the site and being proactive in its planning for an urban future mixed-use development. Next slide, please. The basic concept for the site incorporates those principles by preserving the stream in the center of the site, which set up 2 developable areas for the headquarters north of the stream and the future mixed-use development to the south. Next slide. That concept was then further refined into 3 phases. Phase 1 includes the primary DHH office building on the corner of Blue Ridge and Reedy Creek with a supporting parking deck. And this phase is the one that's going through site plan ASR review now. Future phases will include another tower and parking deck to relocate the rest of the folks throughout the triangle, as well as a future phase 3 plan to include the state's first P3 mixed-use development located south of the stream, but would be future portions of the development for the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the site, approximately 34 acres, spanning Blue Ridge Road, Reedy Creek Road, and District Drive, across the street from the North Carolina Museum of Art, who also supports the project but could not be here tonight. The site is currently occupied by the State Motor Fleet Facilities and Offices and the Department of Agriculture. It's currently zoned OX3 and OX5 urban limited, but is surrounded by CX12 to the east and south. And so we're similarly requesting a CX12 designation to cover all 3 phases of the project as directed by the North Carolina General Assembly. Next slide, please. The flume designation for the site is split, with office and residential mixed-use designation applied to the northern and western portions and the community mixed-use designation in the south eastern corner. We're requesting the rezoning to CX12 for consistency, but we note that the phases I just explained do generally align with the flume designations. The DHHS offices are planned within the office and residential mixed-use area, and the P3 within the community mixed area. Next slide, please. The site is also within the Arena Blue Ridge Small Area Plan of the Comprehensive Plan, which envisions the Blue Ridge corridor to be a vibrant, mixed-use urban area with a well-connected street network, and includes policies overlapping with our guiding principles and our work with the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance. Next slide, please. The state has worked with that alliance to ensure that the project will give life to the vision for this corridor and serve as a catalyst for other development of state property in this area, consistent with the comprehensive plan policies for this area and the alliance's goals, as shown on the screen. Next slide, please. As Bynum explained, it's also consistent with other comprehensive planning policies, including those capitalizing on transit access, corridor revitalization, mixed-use development, and the repurposing of state offices in this corridor. Next slide, please. Many of these policies can be seen in the Phase 1 site plan, a rendering of which is shown on the screen, which is currently moving through ASR review, which includes the initial tower and parking area, but also gets to the goals of the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance, including opportunities for connectivity to the surrounding area, a greenway and sidewalk to the north, and then within the site, north-south connections along tree-lined streets. Next slide, please. A traffic impact analysis was performed as part of the rezoning, and because the ASR is going through concurrently, we will be making improvements according to the recommendations from that TIA, but they will be phased along with each ASR submitted for the project. The Phase 1 improvements that are associated with the concurrent ASR review that's in the process now are shown on the screen and were provided with review of NCDOT and city staff. Next slide, please. The site has been designed to be pedestrian friendly and to connect to existing facilities. It has an existing transit stop along its frontage on Blue Ridge Road and connects to the Greenway along Reedy Creek Road, providing direct access to the museum to the east, all the way to Umset State Park and Trenton Road corridor to the west. Next slide, please. And this shows the overall kind of rendering of what that future development could look like and how those areas are envisioned to be oriented. Of course, the Phase 1 is the area that's currently under review today, and the future phases are to the south, would be subject of further action. In some, I'd like to reserve the rest of my time for Mr. Murrison, but in some, this rezoning request will enable the state to relocate the DHHS personnel from Dix Park and consolidate its offices throughout the region into one headquarters campus. It is consistent with the economic development goals and the small area plans of the comp plan, and we request your approval tonight so that the state can move forward and meet its lease obligations with the city. Mr. Murrison?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Jeff Murrison, Executive Director of the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance, 4734 Alpha Street, Raleigh, North Carolina. The Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance supports the approval of zoning case Z 2021 and applauds the state's investment in our corridor. The rezoning allows for dense mixed-use development and a major employment hub as set forth by the Blue Ridge Corridor study. This repositions the state-owned properties is a strong example of how the corridor can evolve into a more urban and people-friendly district while still meeting the state office space needs. The Alliance supports the approval of this rezoning and continued investment in our corridor, and we urge Council to approve this case. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll reserve the rest of our time.
Great, thank you. And then in opposition, we have Ms. Jean Spooner. So we can reset the clock and get Ms. Spooner on.
Dr. Jean Spooner, Chair of the Umstead Coalition. Good evening. I sent you a documentation writing with some photos that I hope you read. I have two main considerations requests. I would request that you move this item into the council committee for further discussion and allow for a forum for citizen input. And consider all of the phases, not segmenting the project. This site drains to Richland Creek. Richland Creek forms part of the boundary to William B. Umstead State Park. At first, it drains to Richland Lake, an inland flood control structure for Crabtree Creek watershed. And Richland Creek flows through Carl Alwyn Memorial Shank Forest to Richland Lake and continues downstream to the Richland Lake Dam, structure 11A, to form the boundary of William B. Umstead State Park. And the stormwater volume for this watershed has been increasing concurrent with increased development. And in particular, with the two recent state lands, one that you rezoned for bandwidth and the other the parking lot up by Chapel Hill Road, parking lots, excuse me, there's two on the state property, have resulted in a concurrent dramatic increase in sediment being delivered to Richland Lake and Richland Creek. Richland Lake is divided in two by a causeway of Reedy Creek Road. And you'll see from the pictures that I sent you that when we have flooding, the Reedy Creek Lake floods over Reedy Creek Road, making the road and the greenway impassable. This frequency of occurring has increased with concurrent with development in the watershed. So stormwater is very important. The current site plans, I applaud the protection of some of the tributaries and drainage way in the site, but I think we should further examine that for this site and phase 1 and phase 2 of these sites. I yet haven't seen safe bike ped pedestrian corridors along Blue Ridge Road for this site, and I think that's something that we need would be essential to complete the corridor. And of course, the traffic burdens on the residential neighborhoods should be considered, and which includes, of course, the Trenton Road, Reedy Creek Gate, and the Greenway connectors, the Trenton Road connector coming on board, and the current existing Reedy Creek Greenway. Parking access and multimodal access to the site, I think, should be stressed. And lastly, I would implore the council to increase the notification for neighborhood meetings. In this case, it was basically the state asking the state for their input for adjacent properties, and the affected stakeholders and residents in the neighborhood were not informed of the neighborhood meeting. Again, drainage, stormwater to Richland Creek, and I request that you put this into committee for further consideration and request all phases and ensure multimodal access to the site. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for supporting William B. Umstead State Park.
Thank you, Dr. Smayer. And sorry for not getting your title correct. All right, we have 1 minute left for the applicant, but before we go there, I'd like to ask council if you have any questions for the applicant or for Dr. Smayer. Councilmember Fort.
I'll ask a question.
I have a question for Dr. Spooner. Dr. Spooner, did anyone present any of the information that you or the issues that you've raised to the Planning Commission?
I sent the similar letter to the Planning Commission, and no, not that I heard at the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you.
But I would implore the council to ensure such does happen.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. I guess with a minute left for the applicant, I'd love for them to respond to Dr. Spooner's comments and concerns if they could. They may have other things to say, but if they could at least touch on her concerns, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm happy to do that now with as much time as we can. And if we need a little more time to fully answer it, I'm happy to do that. With respect to the first request of being moved into committee for community input, that's a two-part answer. One, because of the timeline that the legislature authorized this to go forward, we're only authorized to get folks off of DHHS and meet the obligations of our lease, which requires everyone to be relocated under one of the leases by 2025. We have to get the rezoning and the ASR approved this year in order to meet that timeline in terms of how long it takes for construction to take place. So going into committee would severely limit our ability to meet that obligation as directed by the General Assembly and to meet our lease obligations with respect to the city, meaning that Dix Parks could be delayed. The other issue related to community input, Will Johnson is on the line. I'm happy to have him give a lengthy explanation of how much community input went into this, by stretching back to 2015 when he interacted with the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance before the site was even selected, which has many stakeholders throughout the corridor. So we're certainly not opposed to over noticing things. Our second neighborhood meeting went to had 50 notices issued and had a discussion there. So happy to elaborate on that as needed. As with respect to the stormwater volume increase, I think that might be best addressed by Brian Purdy, who is also on the line. But of course, this property will follow the UDO with respect to both treating water quality and quantity in a manner that surpasses what is on the site today, which is suburban development that occurred by the state before many of the current stormwater regulations were in place. Mr. Purdy, would you like to elaborate on that point?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. And Jamie gets a gold star for playing civil engineer there. So exactly that. The existing development on the site today, built some 40, 50 years ago, absolutely no stormwater controls out there today. So the redevelopment of the site to allow for this very sophisticated campus will introduce stormwater controls for the first time, which would significantly improve water quality and water quantity on this particular site and downstream.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from council members for the applicant? Councilmember Cox.
So regarding the stormwater controls, this is a general use rezoning. So there aren't any conditions for any kind of enhanced stormwater controls. Is that correct? So we're looking at what, a 10-year storm?
This is Brian Purdy. Yes, that's correct. It's meeting the state requirements as mandated by them for the 2 and 10-year storm, and it treats for the first inch of rain flow.
Yeah, okay. I mean, my only comment about that is that it would have been nice if it would have been a significant improvement if we could have gone beyond that minimum requirement, and that's one of my major concerns.
City Clerk.
I did receive several emails in support of this case and several in opposition, and they have been sent to the council for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for council, or from council rather? Councilmember Knight.
Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion and have a comment before that, please.
Great. Then I will move to close the hearing. And Councilmember Knight, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. First of all, I'd like to say I'm very excited that the city is keeping the Department of Health and Human Services in Raleigh. This is exciting for this part of the city, but it's also exciting for the city as a whole. If some will recall during this process, at one point, Raleigh was close to losing the department to other places. And so great work on behalf of the staff in partnership, and thanks to the General Assembly, their leadership, the governor, and other partners at the state level to put this in the appropriate place where it should be, still in the city of Raleigh and in a walkable, connected area. So looking forward to that. This is a great addition to this area and to the city of Raleigh. And remember also the link back to Dix Park. This is allowing Dix Park to start moving forward in the way that we want it to. We had to make decisions about the department and where they would be located before that was done. This is happening now, and we can start moving forward with Dix Park in a way that we all want to, which is great. I do hope and think that you will keep into consideration the concerns from Dr. Spooner and the Umstead Coalition as you move forward. And we all look forward to working together with the state on moving forward on this project. So at this time, Mayor Pro Tem, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 5th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
And seconded by Councilmember Melton. All in favor? Any opposed? Clerk, that is I can count 6-1 vote with Councilmember Cox opposed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we can bring back Mayor.
You want me to go get her?
Unsure.
En route.
She's coming back now.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have rezoning Z6721 at 3249 Blue Ridge Road.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a request to rezone just under 4 acres from R4 to office mixed use with a 3-story height limit, a parking limited frontage, and some conditions. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. This is on the northwest side of Blue Ridge, east of Edwards Mill. So here's an aerial view of the site. This is a portion of the site. The total property is owned by a church, and they are moving towards subdivision, so they're rezoning just a portion of the property. And a couple of views of the site from the street. So they have the applicant has offered some limitations on uses. They have also limited their total square footage for non-residential use to no more than 60,000 square feet. They have provided a 100-foot building setback from the shared property line to the southwest, and they have limited their hours of operation. They've also provided some limitations on pole-mounted lighting, and they have also made some established some additional conditions around the buffer to the northwestern shared property boundary, additional planting and that kind of thing. And here's an exhibit showing you that buffer range and the boundary along that northwestern property boundary. So what is changing here? They are increasing their residential entitlement significantly, adding office allowed use and adding potential retail. So they're allowed up to 15% of the square footage as retail square footage in the base district. It is consistent with the future land use map and the urban form map. Handful of consistent policies here, even fewer inconsistent policies. Some concerns about compatibility here. Again, the Planning Commission recommends approval. I am happy to answer questions. I believe you have folks signed up on both sides of the issue tonight. And I'd be happy to answer questions you have about process or details of the case.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Bynum? Okay, I am going to then open the hearing. We'll remind everybody we have 8 minutes per side. We have Grace Stiers, Dion Brown, Worth Mills, Rich Baker, and Patrick Faulkner signed up support. Opposed, Eric Walker, Bill Studebaker, and Roger Corner. Opposed. We will start with the applicant and Beth, whoever's speaking on their behalf, if you could put them on.
Great. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. This is Michael Birch with Lone Leaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. With us tonight also is Patrick Faulkner, the applicant, the Keith Corp. Also Rick Baker with Timmons. And then also we'll want to reserve some time for Grace Stiers at Fox Rothschild, who will be speaking in support on behalf of the Edwards Mill townhomes adjacent to us. If we could skip one more slide to the aerial. I'm just going to kind of sit on this while I speak. So the purpose of this rezoning is to allow for the development of a medical office building that would be the new home for a local physician's practice that has called Blue Ridge Road home for over 35 years. As you heard from Ms. Walter, the request is consistent with the future land use map, comprehensive plan, the urban form map. It's compatible with the surrounding area. So I want to focus my comments on our work to address comments that we've received throughout the process. Comments from our neighbors to the west in the Edwards Mill townhomes, from owners across on the south side of Blue Ridge Road, from the Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance, and city staff, given the city's Blue Ridge Road widening project along this segment of Blue Ridge Road. The comments from our neighbors focus primarily on transitions and compatibility. And so in addition to the 2 neighborhood meetings we had, we also held numerous virtual meetings and an in-person meeting with representatives of the Edwards Mill townhomes. And then we also held an additional neighborhood meeting with owners of property across Blue Ridge Road, where we had about 8 to 10 attendees at that meeting. So in response to kind of just the general neighborhood meeting comments and comments from the Edwards Mill townhome neighbors, we prohibited some uses, limited the size of the building, provided a building setback from their property, limited the hours of operation, and also limited lighting adjacent to their property. When we met with the Blue Ridge Road neighbors in June, kind of coming out of that meeting in response to their comments, we prohibited even more uses. We limited even further the hours of operation, and we also restricted lighting along Blue Ridge Road. Now, we understand that there's still some concerns from owners of property across Blue Ridge Road related particularly to building height and hours of operation. We've been pretty clear throughout the process that we really have no desire to go to 3 stories because it's not cost effective and it's not functionally efficient for this type of use. But we understand that from a condition standpoint, we are willing to limit height closer to Blue Ridge Road and provide a setback if the building's to go to 3 stories. We also understand there are concerns about kind of the nature of the use and concerns about it possibly being a urgent care or walk-in minute clinic. We've tried to be clear throughout this process that this practice is not an urgent care. It is a internal medicine physician's practice, but they do need some weekend hours, really solely in order to provide patients who need weekend hours kind of on an appointment basis. It's not available to walk-ins from the general public. The doctors don't like being there on the weekends, and so they want to kind of keep those hours limited, but they also feel like they need to be able to provide that service to existing patients who have that need. So we are willing to further restrict hours of operation on Saturday and Sunday and try to get at, making it clear in the conditions that this is not intended or allowed to be a kind of pure urgent care type use. So with that, I do want to allow some time for Gray to speak, and then also reserve any time that may still be available to address any comments from the folks in opposition. So thank you.
Okay, you have 3 minutes left.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Gray Stiers. Can you hear me on the microphone all right?
Yes, we can.
My address is 434 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh, and I'm serving as counsel for the Edwards Mill Townhome Owners Association. That is the group of townhomes immediately to the west on the map before you. Owner of the common area identified as PIN number 0785850576. That's referenced in the conditions. When the homeowners association there learned of the rezoning, I was retained and reached out to Mr. Birch. We identified several issues, including the building setbacks, hours of operation, lighting, and most importantly, the preservation of the existing tree buffer separating the properties. And I think there may be a correction needed on one of the initial staff slides. The conditions that I have seen filed shows for calls for preservation of a minimum of 50-foot wide buffer in that area, ranging from 20 to 40 feet from the property line. So the landowners applicant have committed to a 50-foot wide buffer, subject to check and confirmation by Mr. Birch. These issues were subject to considerable discussion and ultimately agreement between the homeowners association and the applicant. We very much appreciate the efforts of the applicant, Mr. Birch, and the landowner to address my client's concerns, and we're glad to speak at the hearing and state that we have no objection to the rezoning with these current conditions. We appreciate the work that the applicant has and the extent to which they have gone to satisfy our concerns, and we support the application. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Hey, do we have any questions for Gray? Okay. There's 1 minute and 39 seconds left.
Madam Mayor, we would just like to reserve that, if possible, to address any comments that y'all hear in opposition.
Okay, we have 3 people who've signed up in opposition. We'll start with, I'm going to remind everybody there's 8 minutes total. So please leave others some time to speak. We will start with Eric Walker.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Awesome. Hello, Madam Mayor and council members. Thank you for your time this evening. I've been a Raleigh resident for a decade and recently was fortunate enough to purchase my very first home in the city I love on Blue Ridge Road. I've gotten to meet many of my neighbors over the past few months, and we've gotten increasingly concerned about the rezoning of this portion of property owned by the Summit Church. What will this do to the neighborhood appearance? On Blue Ridge Road, we have a series of 1-story homes. Across from that, we have a proposed 3-story box building that will sit higher on the ridge than its front neighbors. It will tower over these homes. This proposed and imposing design of the building will sit close to Blue Ridge Road with backlot parking, as it creates increased traffic and safety concerns for many of our neighbors that have to drive up their sloping driveways to get to work. Some of these driveways directly face the proposed rezoning property entrance. With support from the 2 zip codes that represent this community, we've gathered 120 signatures in opposition of this rezoning. Next slide, please. There's a $16.4 million Blue Ridge Road widening project with plans of a multi-use path to encourage both safe biking and walking in our neighborhood. In the plans, we even have public art as one of the standout elements, adding both character and connectivity to this community. But in an established residential portion of Blue Ridge Road, an office building will break up that connectivity by claiming to provide a need that is already provided by the established health and wellness district down the road. Next slide, please. So we need to ask ourselves, how can we do better? We realize development is needed as Raleigh grows and are not opposed to thoughtfully consider development that can connect and not change the character of our neighborhood. Let's consider adding design provisions so that this proposed 50-foot building blends with the surrounding neighborhood and matches the existing streetscape. Let's consider opportunities for mixed use to give our neighborhood a destination to look forward to and not one to dread. Let us send this back to the Planning Commission with the caveat that we need to empower all impacted neighbors in this discussion with the applicant, not just the ones in the back who are not impacted by traffic and appearance. And let us also consider involving the appropriate city employees that can actively support and be present in these conversations. I think together we can realize a better solution. I'd now like to pass this along to my neighbors Bill Studebaker and Roger Corner. Thank you.
This is Bill Studebaker. I live at 3936 Bentley Bridge Road, just down the street from the proposed development. On the first slide, the lot proposed for rezoning and its immediate neighborhood are shown here, where the lot is on the top left and the houses are on the bottom right. The building that the applicant has proposed is 3 floors, 50 feet in height, and 60,000 square feet. On the next slide, we can see a building of almost exactly those dimensions, located just a half-mile away in the medical office-focused area across from Rex Hospital. That's 3 floors, 45 feet in height, and 60,000 square feet. If you put that building on the lot across from the homes on Bentley Ridge, it will have the effect of completely dominating the neighborhood, an effect exacerbated by its position atop the ridge, where the lot is several feet higher than Blue Ridge Road, and the homes are actually below Blue Ridge Road. Next slide. Some key issues we have with the proposed building are as follows. It is completely out of proportion with the surrounding neighborhood, even with the proposed setback. It's in a location where it would be more appropriate to have a stepped down form relative to the very massed buildings along Blue Ridge Road around Rex Hospital. It's inconsistent with the comprehensive plan policies on reinforcing patterns and on infill that have the single biggest impact in defining how any proposed structure fits with the local environment. And significantly, we've been really frustrated in our attempts to discuss alternatives with the property owner and their representatives that would benefit both them and our community. The property owner and their representatives have not responded to us. Next slide. That's really too bad because just in the immediate area of the proposed rezoning, we've got examples in the brownstones and condominiums that are next to the townhomes that are substantially higher density. On the next slide, there are other alternatives where you've either got mixed use commercial and retail or even medical office at Rexview with compatible design and setback features that fit in much better with our neighborhood. Last slide. In short, we'd like to be able to explore options with the property owners, assist with more active engagement by the city to help such discussions take place. And from here, Roger.
Okay, there are 2 minutes left.
Good evening. Good evening. This is Roger Corner, 4136 English Garden Way. Next slide, please. The aerial view. You've seen this view before. It reflects the concentrated residential area and this whole view. May I have the next slide, please? You see this view in these hundreds of acres of residential properties. There's only 2 acres here that are zoned O&I. The larger church buildings are R4 zoning. Next slide, please. Why do I oppose this rezoning? It's not part of the Blue Ridge Corridor, which curves away from Blue Ridge at Raleigh. On this section, there's robust residential activity with new foundering subdivisions, new homes on Blue Ridge, Edgemont, Normac, and rebirth of Meredith Woods right across the street. When the policies were applied to support this rezoning, they were considered based on the comprehensive plan designation of institution and also a transit emphasis area. In my view, the comprehensive plan doesn't reflect what is occurring on the ground. There have been dramatic changes in the last few years with a greater need for close-in residential. Raleigh needs more close-in residential, and that's occurring in this segment of Blue Ridge. An office building would be out of place. In fact, a standalone medical building isn't really what is defined as institutional. You ask, a transit emphasis area? Yes, there is a bus route down Blue Ridge, but it's empty 95% of the time and not meeting its objectives. The Blue Ridge corridor south of here, which you've seen pictured tonight, is more of a transit emphasis area. I don't think our section of Blue Ridge justifies transit or office. The residential section of Blue Ridge is only a 2-lane, 35-mile-per-hour road, which will remain the same after the improvement project. Large office buildings belong on 4-lane, high-capacity streets like the Blue Ridge corridor to the south, Lake Boone, Edwards Mill, Raleigh, etc. The parcel in question, along with small 2-acre parcel, are not contiguous to any other O&I.
Mr. Corner,
Slide 3, please.
Mr. Corner, your time has run out. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask if there's any questions or if Mr. Birch would like to use his remaining minute to address some of the questions that were raised. Minute and a half.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. So first of all, just want to make a note about one of the buildings that was shown that was 3 stories and is about 65,000 square feet. In that case, the long face of that building faced Blue Ridge Road. Our site is only about 200 feet wide, and so we would not have that long face of the building facing Blue Ridge Road. And we've said from the very beginning that our desire is to do a 2-story building, and we have tried to get as much comfort as we can going through the sketch plan process, working with staff on understanding the site constraints as best as possible. And because of the site constraints, because the adjacent townhomes had essentially located some of their open space in area that we could otherwise count as tree conservation, but can no longer do that. We're dealing with even more site constraints, and we just want to leave the flexibility open for that 3rd story. But again, we're willing to agree to, push that 3rd story back from the road. I do want to note that while Blue Ridge Road is 2 lanes today, the project that will be completed, before this building will be open, is to go to a full 3-lane section with a center turn lane, separated bike lanes on both sides, with tree lawns and sidewalks on both sides. So a much wider, complete street. And I'll note that this type of use, both doctors, employees, patients can utilize the transit that is available on Blue Ridge,
Michael,
and is called for higher service on Blue Ridge. So,
Michael, we have time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any questions of the applicant or of those on the call? Councilmember Branch?
Yes, thank you. I went out to this site and met with some of the residents, and I know one of the questions has been how close the building is to the road. As I read the backup materials, one of the inconsistencies, the way I understood it, is because the building is not up to the road and that they have parking in between the building and the road. Can Michael speak to that and what is actually their intent as far as the building and proximity to the road?
Yes, Councilor Branch. So because Blue Ridge Road is a transit emphasis corridor, that calls for us to add the parking limited frontage. Now, the parking limited frontage encourages that building to be located closer to the road. Now, it does allow for one, at most, one double-loaded bay of parking between the building and the street. And so essentially what we would do with kind of a height condition that we're proposing is saying, if we were to do a 3-story building, that it would have to be pushed back behind parking, or at least, that 3-story portion of the building would have to be pushed back. But we are, I think, consistent with, the transit emphasis corridor designation by adding that parking limited frontage, which essentially says you don't want kind of a sea of parking, between the building and the street. Think about like the shopping center over at Old Raleigh. That's kind of what it's trying to not allow anymore.
Okay, and does staff have any thoughts or feedback on that? And I'm talking about the design policy 7.3, the guidelines.
Right. So I think the issue here is that the request is consistent with policy, but the policy is ahead of the built form in the area. And so we're trying to move forward to a new model of development that's just not there yet, right? And so trying to cultivate development that supports the transit corridor, and recognizing that there's a transition there, right? And that the compatibility immediately is maybe not what we would like for it to be, right? Growing pains.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor, and this is the point of me asking that question. Those neighbors, and that's the conversation I had with them, the main issue that they had was the height up to the road. And what I understand and what we have is we're actually going to have, you have the road, the sidewalk, or bike lanes, sidewalk. Then there's going to be some 2-bay parking in the building. So that's my understanding of it. So the building isn't going to be exactly as far against the road as I think we thought. So I just wanted to share my understanding of it.
Right, I'm a little confused. So as part of the issue is it won't be as close to the road as we're thinking.
Right, there's going to be parking in between the sidewalk and the building. You're going to have 2 bays of parking. So you drive in.
That would be allowed.
Yeah, that would be allowed.
Yeah.
And from what I'm hearing from the applicant is if they do 3 stories, they're going to do the parking.
Okay. Do you have any additional questions for the applicant? Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I just want to be clear. I think we've heard that the applicant's attorney is willing to work on some conditions that he has said he's proposing, and I do appreciate that. So I think we can, I guess procedure will be to close it and then give them the amount of time to work with the neighbors on this and come back to us. I as well appreciate Councilor Branch going out there. I went out there as well with the neighbors, and it changes your perspective once you're on there, as it often does. It's a very big piece of property, a green space, basically, that's still there. This is a very large building being proposed to put on it for a single use. So I appreciate the applicant's attorneys being willing to continue to talk to the neighbors. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on the townhome associations to one side, but we need to make sure that the neighbors in the single family homes across Blue Ridge are also at least responded to and in a way that they need to be. So I appreciate them being willing to carry on that conversation. So I like to at the appropriate time, once it's closed, to ask for it to be brought back to us, I guess, in a month, or we can talk about 2 weeks, whichever one's more suitable. Thank you.
Clerk has a question.
No question. Just I did receive letters of concern about this, and they have been forwarded to you for consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Councilmember Knight, you're proposing this be held until 10/19 or I guess 11/2. Can I ask Michael Birch, how much time do you feel that you need to work with the neighbors on formulating these new conditions? Will 2 weeks be enough, or will 30 days be required?
Mayor, if possible, and I don't want this to make the process feel rushed, but you know, I know that we at least can add 2 conditions that we've talked about, limiting height and hours. And so if possible, we would like to have the ability to come back on the 19th, knowing that if we're not resolved, we don't want to take up your time on the 19th and would then ask to come back on the 2nd. But recognize we don't want to make the process feel rushed, but I think there is the possibility that, you know, we can have discussions with the neighbors this week and certainly add the conditions that we know we can, you know, add already by the end of this week, and still continue the conversation though. So we would like the opportunity to come back on the 19th if possible.
Councilmember Knight?
Yeah, and thank you, Madam Mayor. And my interest is just making sure that there's time to have a deep conversation with the neighbors. I sometimes think that 2 weeks, they got to put the conditions in by this Friday. Can they have that conversation in that amount of time? If they believe they can, then we could try it. If they don't get it done, then we can delay it 2 more weeks to the 2nd. So I'm okay with that if they can make sure they have those conversations in due diligence. Thank you.
Okay, so we need to then close the hearing so they can add conditions, correct, Bynum?
I'm gratified. I feel like the last 7 years I've been talking to y'all has really paid off. But the rules changed a couple months ago, and you no longer have to close the hearing to change the conditions. So you could leave the hearing open or close it. The difference is that if you close it, the applicant only has 30 days to further modify. In either scenario, they have to be more restrictive with the conditions they bring forward.
Hey, do you want to leave the hearing open then? And in 2 weeks, we'll see what progress has been made? Talking to you, Councilor Knight.
Too many options. I'm fine then to leave it open and to see where we are in 2 weeks, and hopefully we can take care of it then.
And Bynum, they still got to get their conditions to planning 10 days before the meeting, correct?
That's exactly right. To be considered on the next agenda, we'd need those materials by Friday of this week.
Madam Mayor, this is Michael Birch. This is a case that was filed prior to the effective date of the text change. So I just want to make sure that the new rules apply to this and not the old rules. I just want to be clear.
I think the rules went into effect. There was no written rule that, as I read it, that it went into effect when it was passed and didn't say it only applied to pending cases, or that it didn't apply to pending cases, it only applied to new cases.
Okay, if we close the hearing, then they have to have all the conditions finalized in 30 days.
That is correct.
Okay.
Can I ask one procedural question, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
If it's closed, there's no more public hearing, though, right? But if it's left open, is there potentially more public hearing, or what's the status of public hearing when it's left open?
So what we did today, we allowed. What we did today with Creedmoor is we allowed 4 minutes for each side. That was my suggestion, and all of you concurred. So there's an opportunity to continue to hear from both sides if it's left open. If we close it, there is a deadline that has to be met, and that's within 30 days. And sometimes there's benefits to doing that.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would just, I guess, recommend or ask to leave it open and come back in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that's a motion?
If that's what it needs to be, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do we have a second? Councilmember Buffkin has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? Okay, the hearing is kept open. Thank you, everybody, for your time, and please get together with the neighbors and see if we can have some meaningful discussion and move this forward. Thank you. Next is text change TC 321, Bicycle Street cross sections.
Yes, and Jason Myers with Raleigh Transportation. Excuse me, Justin Rometta from Planning and Development and Eric Lamb from Transportation are also here to assist with this item. This is a brief timeline overview of this case that dates to a recommendation from BPAC in 2019 and was authorized this spring by City Council. During the spring and summer, staff worked with the Planning Commission, with the Development Services Advisory Commission, that's DSAC, and with members of BPAC, that's the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, as well as some bikeway design experts outside of city staff to revise and improve this text change. Planning Commission recommended approval on a 6-3 vote. The 3 dissenting votes were mostly due to concerns, wanting to deal with specific concerns at Planning Commission before forwarding a recommendation to City Council. This text change is consistent with Comprehensive Plan Policy T1.3, which directs the city to develop in a way that offers choices of different transportation modes. It would apply to the common avenue street types. These are most of the thoroughfares and collectors in the city of Raleigh, but it would not apply to main streets, to local streets, to neighborhood streets, and to sensitive area streets. The primary effect of TC3 would be to move the bicycle lanes from the inside the street to behind the curb. This requires a buffer between the bikeway and the curb, and the result is a bikeway that's appropriate for all ages and abilities. By separating bikes and scooters from both pedestrians and from motor vehicles, trucks, and cars, it allows for capacity, speed, and safety. As part of the Planning Commission motion to recommend approval, Planning Commission made 3 specific recommendations to City Council. As the first of them was stated in the meeting, consider retaining utility easement on the 2-lane undivided avenue. I believe after rewatching the video carefully that the intention was to consider removing the utility placement easement from that street section, and perhaps only in cases with 0 setbacks. The second suggestion was to adjust the effective date to provide some more time. That would be in comparison to, I think, a normal practice of 30 days. And the third was to consider a design solution for more urban areas like the main street type. This could be done by authorizing a separate text change. I'll quickly touch on the first and the third, describing a couple of technical issues to help council understand these issues. A utility placement easement is an easement on private property that allows the placement of utilities such as fiber optic lines. It exists in our current standards partly to reduce impacts to street trees. Street lights and overhead utility poles can also be placed in that space. Most of our current avenue standards include this easement. The image at left is from our existing code showing C as the utility placement easement in a location, and in the table it's 5 feet wide. As drafted, TC3 would remove it from all of the avenue street types except for the 2-lane undivided. Removing the easement is due to a challenge and an opportunity stemming from the bikeway design. The challenge is that the shift in the bikeway to behind the curb pushes the utility easement too far from the roadway to be an effective location for streetlights. While the opportunity is that the addition of the 3.5-foot buffer behind the curb provides an opportunity to place utilities in that space without damaging trees or putting it under the bike lane. The bikeway can also be a place to put some of it underground underneath, and that both of those locations are shown in the image on at right, circled in red. On the other hand, placing utilities under or above the street trees impacts our city's tree canopy, and placing them under or above the sidewalk, especially poles in the sidewalk, creates problems for ADA accessibility and in maintenance of pedestrian traffic during utility construction. TC3 includes a different and narrower streetscape design for the two-lane undivided avenue. This is the lowest classification street that this text change would apply to. In this design, the bikeway is behind the street trees, and this is appropriate for this design, or for this classification. This was developed in consultation with DSAC, and it's appropriate due to lower speeds and volumes and lower preponderance of commercial vehicles like trucks on these narrower streets. On faster or busier streets, the location of street trees between the bikeway and the back of curb can create some visibility and potentially safety issues at driveways. But however, because of the lack of the 3.5 foot buffer behind the curb, there's nowhere for utilities to go without impacting the trees or the bikeway or pedestrian accessibility. And while underground utilities could be trenched or drilled under the sidewalk or the bikeway with some minor impact, poles can't be safely placed in that area. So for these reasons, staff recommends retaining the existing utility placement easement for the street type. During the Planning Commission discussion of this item, one option that was mentioned was removal of this easement in cases where there was a 0-foot setback in the zoning district. And that's a situation where the whole condition of the street edge can become more urban. The other issue I'll touch on briefly is a design solution for more urbanized areas. Throughout the process, there was a lot of feedback about what should happen in these more urban areas, such as places with main streets. This text change was authorized for avenue streets, but there are many main streets in our street plan as well. Some examples include Hargett Street and West Street in downtown, Industrial and Navajo Drives in Midtown, South Saunders near Dix Park, the section north of the split with the Dawson Connector is another example, and the draft Western Boulevard and Capitol Boulevard North Corridor studies propose mapping this street type in other places as well. An additional text change for a Main Street section could be requested by council, and staff has generated a few ideas about how that might be done within the existing current right-of-way and street width standards for that street type. For clarity on the impacts of TC3 and to simplify comparison, this table shows how much 3 different measurements for these street cross sections change in a % basis compared to the existing code. The right column is the right-of-way width. I'm sorry, the left column is the right-of-way width. The middle column is the combination of right-of-way and any utility placement easement, if that's applicable. And the rightmost column is the curb-to-curb. That's the roadway or street construction between the curbs. Red numbers are increases in the width, while blue numbers are decreases in width, both compared to current standards. And the table illustrates a net result of many improvements and tweaks made to TC3 over the summer. The right-of-way is usually a bit wider than in our current standards, but if you consider the utility placement easement, it's often narrower in total width. And the most expensive part of construction, that's the roadway between the curb that must support heavy vehicles like fire trucks and buses and heavy trucks. That is much narrower in some cases and narrower in all circumstances and all of these text changes, or all of these cross sections. That concludes my presentation. What questions can I answer for council?
Okay, I have a question, but Councilmember Cox, go.
Yeah, just like I'm looking at item A, which is a 2-lane undivided avenue. And so what I'm looking at is I see a 5-foot wide bike lane, 6-foot wide pedestrian lane, and then there's a little 1-foot strip between the two. So that adds up to 12 feet. I was wondering if any consideration was given to combining or having a single multi-use path that maybe 8 to 10 feet wide. If it was 8 feet wide, you would save 4 feet. And I was wondering if any of that was ever considered instead of having a separated bike lane and a separated pedestrian path, sidewalk, just have one multi-use path.
Yes, sir. That was certainly considered. There's a couple of answers to that simultaneously. One is that the standard allows for that to be designed as a multi-use path, that there's some flexibility in there that an applicant or a developer could do to put it in as a multi-use path. And it's actually, for clarity, it's a 1.5 foot space in between. And one of the default ways to do that is to put a mountable curb that delineates that space. I think international design practices, it often directs us to make something that's non-walkable, that's uncomfortable to walk on, to help keep cyclists and pedestrians in different spaces. One of the reasons to do that is for speed and capacity, in that you have very many cyclists or very many scooters, and they can create safety issues and a lot of conflicts with pedestrians. And that in some cases a multi-use path is appropriate. But the other answer to the question is that a multi-use path is really a 10-foot minimum standard, and any smaller than that, it becomes more of a wide sidewalk. So as proposed in TC3 right now, it's a 6-foot sidewalk, a 5-foot bikeway, and a 1.5 foot buffer space, which could be effectively all done in asphalt and striped. It could be a mountable curb. It could be a band of pavers. There's a lot of flexibility there for a developer to propose what they want. And the total width of that space is standard of 12.5 feet. Does that answer your question, sir?
Well, if I understand correctly, then you are saying that a developer could put in a 10-foot multi-use path rather than this 12.5 feet or 13 feet wide option.
As written, they could put in a 12.5 foot multi-use path.
12.5.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, the best way to maybe manage that would be to stripe a separate bike facility from the pedestrian space and delineate different areas for folks.
So you're saying they could not opt for a 10-foot wide multi-use path?
No, sir. The standard is a minimum of 12.5 foot total.
Okay.
Yeah, and somebody in the audience reminded me that there is a variance process that can result in that sort of outcome, but as the strict application of the code is written, these are minimums.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I have, bear with me here. So bear with me. During COVID, I have ridden my Peloton bike around the world. And before COVID, I had the opportunity to bike ride in different cities in Europe. And oftentimes, like what we see here is you have bike paths on both sides of the road. What you often find there is there's one bike, like very large bike lane on one side of the road with pedestrians on either side, but the bike paths go back and forth and like they're not separated by the streets. Was any consideration given to looking at these type of different designs that are used in many cities in Europe?
Yes, ma'am. There's one challenge with doing something asymmetrical that's difficult in the way that our planning and development code applies things. If you have a property with a frontage, requirements are measured from the center line. And if there is a different requirement for one side than the other, it becomes very difficult to administer and to describe what that code would be. That's one aspect of making that very challenging. The other is that in cases in other cities around the world where they have a bidirectional bikeway on one side of a street, they tend to do that only in places where there's very few driveways because it can be very difficult to manage the conflict with vehicles crossing those driveways. And the city of Raleigh has relatively generous driveway standards. I'm sure the development community would disagree with that, but compared to the international practice, that is certainly the case. And in places where we could have a driveway every 100 or 200 or 300 foot, depending on a couple of different factors in our code, and much more frequently where land is already well divided up, having bidirectional facilities like that, which we are installing right now on Gorman Street, where there's only, I think, 2 driveways in that 3/4-ish mile section, gets to be challenging from a safety standpoint because somebody turning left into a driveway is looking ahead of them and not for the cyclist coming 20 miles an hour behind them, in parallel with them. And in the process of working on this text change, a number of times I described that our design vehicle is a grandma on an e-bike screaming around at 20 miles an hour. It is not something where we have to be very careful about people appearing out of nowhere from the point of view of a driver. And that's one of the challenges of putting bidirectional facilities on one side. Now, I do believe that the flexibility in our code, if there was a new street planned through a development that was greenfield and the developer controlled both sides of the street and it made sense, they could meet the minimums, just move both directions to one side, that should be completely allowed. It's just usually our development is looking at half of a street and the requirement on half. Does that help provide a little bit of context to some of the thinking?
Mm-hmm, it does. I'm just thinking that in instances where that could happen, could it happen under these rules?
My interpretation of that is that it could, if a developer controlled both sides of the property at the same time, and there could be connections to it. So, for instance, if a developer happened to develop both sides of the street, and there was only 100 or 200 or 300 foot of frontage, and they couldn't make a connection, then that probably couldn't happen. But if it was something in an area where they might have a half a square mile of what's now farmland, and they're building a new street right through the middle of that for the endpoints between two intersections, that's certainly something that they should be able to accomplish in this draft. Eric would like to add one thing to that.
One other thing for the City Council to keep in mind is that the City Council has the ability to adopt specific streetscapes for specific locations. Again, that type of asymmetry can be very context specific. So the council can adopt a streetscape plan for a particular segment of street that's commensurate with what we're considering right now for the Lake Wheeler Road project adjacent to Dix. That has some specific asymmetrical aspects with the residential on one side and potential development and the park on the other. So in that specific context, we will have the ability to create an asymmetrical element. But from the purposes of what we're developing today, these are specifically just standard typical sections that would be applied on a completely symmetrical basis.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Eric, because that's actually one of the sites I was thinking of. It would be, I didn't know it was called, what is it? What do you call it? What do you call it when it's both ways again?
Bidirectional.
Bidirectional, thank you. I learned a new term today. Okay, thank you. All right. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I'm then going to open the hearing. We have 3 people speaking in support. Ted Van Dyke signed up in opposition, but he told me he didn't think he could call in today. He has a conflict. So I'm going to start with 8 minutes for those in support. We'll start with Mary Sell.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Mary Sell. My address is 1178 Haynes Street. I'm the Interim Executive Director of Oaks and Spokes, the local advocacy organization committed to advancing transportation options and transportation equity in Raleigh. I'm speaking today in support of text change TC 321. This text change will work to codify above curb all ages and abilities bike facilities on our Avenue Street cross sections and will greatly accelerate our community goals for providing a transportation network that provides access and opportunity for all. Oaks and Spokes has worked closely with stakeholders on this text change, and we feel the proposal coming before you effectively mitigates concerns brought forward during the planning process. Staff have worked very hard to account for all feedback received, and this text change is a collaborative effort that has received significant review and stakeholder feedback. In 2019, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission brought forward these recommendations, and Oaks and Spokes is eager to see them codified so that we can begin implementing a transportation network that better aligns with our desired outcomes to build a more resilient Raleigh. It's time to build a better tomorrow that our children can depend on. Thank you for your consideration and helping to advance community goals for a more climate-friendly transportation system and future.
Thank you, Mary. Next, we have Dwight Otwell. Beth, is Dwight on the line?
Yes, he is, Mayor. Go ahead, Dwight.
I thought I was unmuted.
Happens to all of us, right?
All right.
All right. Thank you, Dwight.
All right, I'm on now.
You are.
All right, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here before you tonight, Mayor and Council. My name is Dwight Otwell. I'm the current chair of the BPAC. We have been working with staff on this text change for a number of years now, and we're very excited to see this moving forward. I won't try to follow up from Mr. Myers and Ms. Sell. I can't say it better than they have. I will only point out that this text change would not apply to any of the streets in the downtown core in what's known as the Christmas Plan area. This that has a special transportation development environment. This text change is much more likely to apply to big developments that are coming in on the outskirts of town and some of our greenfield developments. I look forward to seeing this get implemented and urge council to move quickly to see this get done. Every week that goes by, we have developments that happen that are putting in substandard bike lanes because the development standards are out of date. And thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you, Dwight. Next, we have Nick Neptune.
Good evening, Mayor Baldwin, distinguished council members. It is good to be here with all of you. It is a privilege to be here with all of you. My name is Nick Neptune, 313 Camden Street. I'm speaking this evening as a partner with a local development firm, a commissioner with Raleigh's Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission, as a board member with Oaks and Spokes, and most importantly, as a resident of Raleigh for over a decade. As a proponent and advocate for a more sustainable and equitable future for our growing city, I'm speaking before you tonight in favor and in support of text change TC 321. And I'll tell you what, for the sake of time, I'll keep it brief and just say that I do have the privilege through my work and through, I suspect, our shared work, in coming into contact with residents, old and new, on a regular basis, daily and nightly. Folks who share with me how much they appreciate our bicycling infrastructure. People are choosing to move to our city and stay in our city because of the all ages and all abilities infrastructure that we are seeking to invest in and expand upon. And I think anything that we can do to continue in that trajectory is a good thing for the city of Raleigh. So deeply appreciate all of you, deeply appreciate all of your work, and thank you for your time this evening and consideration of text change TC 321. Hope to see it move through as quickly as possible. Thank you so much. Take care. Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to ask if Ted did call in, Ted Van Dyke.
He did not.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Cox.
Yes, I have Mr. Van Dyke's email in front of me, and the one thing he wrote that I'd like to get some clarification on is that he says that TC3, while it's about enhanced bike lanes, it also entails widening every road classification in the street manual. And I was wondering if staff could speak to that.
Yes, sir. It certainly does not affect every classification in the street manual, but it does widen, I think, every right-of-way but one. I'd have to refer to the table, which I have in my slides. I don't think we need to bring them up. One of the street sections that is the TC3 applies to, the 4-lane avenue parallel parking, which is not a very common designation in our street plan, is actually narrower in the right-of-way. All of the other ones do get wider in the right-of-way, but it is only the avenues. And as that table, which if you want, I can pull it back up, shows the change in right-of-way, the change in right-of-way plus easement, and the change in curb-to-curb width.
Okay, but when we talk about right of way, we're really talking about the entire area that encompasses the bike lanes. Is that correct?
And the streetscape and the easements associated with the right-of-way. The footprint of the street itself, from the curb to curb, the roadway footprint or the street footprint, in every case gets narrower with this text change.
Okay, thank you.
I do have another question. I think 3 members of the Planning Commission felt that this needed some more work. Could you tell me or share with me what their concerns were?
Sure. As best as I can understand it, some of them wanted to work through details about how exactly it might be implemented. There is certainly a lot of work that staff will have to do after the ordinance is adopted to develop standard details, to smooth through the development review process, to give the professionals who work for developers good solid guidance, and to make sure that we're building things in a safe and effective manner. I think some people would like to see that work before the ordinance. I don't know that staff has the ability to do that under many different proposals. I think there were some requests to test out what this looked like in various places in the city and to see renderings and kind of get examples from more of a corridor planning standpoint. And I might turn it over to Eric, who was at that meeting. I've just watched the tape. There may be some aspects of that I didn't quite catch watching the recording. And he said that's it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Buffkin, then Councilmember Branch.
Thank you, Mayor. So let me follow on the mayor's question, if I could. Could you just frame up those issues again? I think you had them listed on one of your slides. I mean, the issues that the Planning Commission suggested that we consider.
Oh, of course. The 3 issues that they asked for consideration on were the utility placement easement on the 2-lane undivided avenue, which I talked about that in depth of why staff's recommending that to be there. The second was the effective date. I think our normal practice, and the city attorney may be able to clarify this, is to have text changes be adopted or be effective 30 days after passage by city council. And one of the things that Planning Commission asked for was maybe to extend that a little bit longer to give more time to let the development community adjust and to let staff develop some of those materials that I mentioned. And then the third was to consider main streets and urban areas, which really the way to do that is to authorize a separate text change. And we would recommend in staff not to try to complicate this existing effort by expanding the scope of what was authorized. But if that's something council wishes to do, we can certainly bring back some ideas and some details to council, and there could be another text change to follow on.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. I think I might like to talk with staff offline about the Main Street design and maybe bring something back to council if there's interest in pursuing that. And I think you did mention, and maybe you can remind me, in the Midtown plan, there were 2 main streets that you mentioned. Industrial was one, and what was the other one?
Industrial Drive and Navajo Drive are both designated, at least in some sections, as Main Street parallel parking. There are other streets that were adopted into that area plan with that cross section as well. Some of them in our bike plan have the designation of separated bikeway and Main Street parallel parking, which our current street standards don't allow for both of those things to happen at the same time. So there's a little bit of a conflict there, and that's part of what's driving some of the concerns and some of the feedback we've heard. And really, to be, without getting into the weeds, one of the ways to address that is to repurpose the on-street parking space in that standard to be a bikeway and a buffer without really changing anything else about the street standard. But it is inconsistent with the name parallel parking, which is right in the street classification currently.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Councilmember Branch, you had a question?
Well, it was more or less, I think staff and the committees and all the community have done a lot of great work here in moving things forward. And I think the Main Street section is something that needs to be handled that has to be addressed outside of this text change. And at the appropriate time, once this hearing is closed, I would move I'm ready to make a motion to approve this. And I'm willing to, in the motion, to give it a 60-day effective date, which may address some of the concerns from the Planning Commission instead of our standard 30. If staff thinks 60 days will be good.
I'm concerned about some of the unintended consequences. But
like
maybe that's what where the 60 days could come in. Yeah, like not being able to apply it after like in the first 30 days and extending it, like you said.
Well, I mentioned it. I'm ready to move the motion as is. I mentioned the 60 days to get feedback from you all, but I'm ready to read the motion as is, which will only make it 30 days.
Councilmember Fort and then Councilmember Buffkin.
So when would the evaluation of the main streets and the other cross sections, when will that process take place?
Councilmember Fort, we could bring something back, I think, in the basic sense in the next council meeting, and to give you guys a chance to see the sort of things we're thinking about, talk through those issues, and then the development of the text change is a process that takes a little bit longer to go through the portal and the drafting and the public review. I don't know off the top of my head how long that takes ideally. I know that my colleague Justin, who's in the audience, could answer a little bit more about the text change development process and the timeline for that. But to give council information about what that text change could look like, I think we could bring back something in the next meeting.
That would be helpful for me to hear the process on that.
Justin just said to me 3 to 6 months. You probably couldn't hear him off of the mic in the total text change development process.
Okay. How long has this text change been going through the system?
It was authorized by City Council on March 16th, 2021. Basically, that was 6 months ago in a few weeks. The Planning Commission had asked for an extension to have some more dialogue with DSAC and to refine this a little bit. So it may have taken longer than some of them do.
Okay. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I too am supportive of Mr. Brandt's proposed motion. I wouldn't mind having it go into effect 30 days in the usual way. I did want to clarify and make sure I understood that Councilmember Branch, either way, that you intended to include that utility easement as is or not. Did you have a position on that?
As is, within the plan that in this text change, moving forward with that, because I think, when we talk about easements, that's different than actually vehicles moving. We're talking about where the wires are going to be in the ground. That's the part we're really talking about right now. And I think, staff, they understand that scope and everything. So I'm ready to move.
Agreed. Well, I'm supportive of that, and thank you.
Councilmember Melton.
I just want to clarify the answer to a question. It is true that we as a council authorized this text change in March, but from what I understand, this has been developed and worked on for years by BPAC. It took us to get it from BPAC to staff to count. Basically, it took years for it to get to the council table to authorize the text change. That is my understanding.
Roughly 2 years. Yes, sir, that is correct. It was roughly 2 years from the BPAC recommendation to the point when council authorized the text change. I think part of the thinking at that time was there was a street design manual update under consideration by staff, and the thought was that recommendation can be brought into that process. It got held up and postponed somewhat, so it was brought forward this spring.
Got it. And so hearing the direction of the conversation today, I'm obviously the liaison to BPAC, so I try to take a little bit of a backseat and I'm also, I think, probably the loudest on bike ped issues often, and so I didn't want to hog the conversation.
but seeing the direction of where it has gone, I am prepared and ready to second Councilmember Branch's motion when the hearing is closed at the appropriate time.
Okay. With that, any other questions? Okay, with that said, I am going to close the hearing. Councilmember Branch, you made a motion and told you I'm a little concerned about the unintended consequences in that 30-day time frame. If we could go 45 or 60 days, that would make me a lot more comfortable. Because this is going to take time to implement and for people to understand. And I just want to see it done right. So we've already come this far. Just, you know.
That's fair. Basically, I moved to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 5th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text amendment with the effective date 45 days from approval.
Okay. Councilmember Melton has seconded that. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, I want to thank DPAC for their persistence and their work on this. 2 years is a long time to get somewhere, but they really have done a good job in moving us forward on our bike ped effort. So thank you to them, and thanks to everyone who has worked on this, including staff. So, hey. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for those comments. I second them heartily. Quick question on the Main Streets issue. Do we need a formal motion on that, or I think staff heard there's a lot of interest in hearing back on that issue. I just want to make sure.
I'm waiting for staff to come back and just. In other words, did you get the message, or do we have to have a formal motion?
I can answer that. I don't think you have to have the way it's going to work is like any text change where you'll have to vote to authorize it and then go to planning commission. So I don't think you're wanting to authorize it tonight. You're just wanting them to come back and present. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then I don't think you need a vote. I think they can come back the next time. And then if you want to move forward, then you would vote on the text change authorization.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Councilmember Fort, was that your question as well?
That was.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think there is a lot of interest in that. So, all right. Thank you. Next, we have text change TC 1320, NX outdoor bar seating.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. Justin Rometto with Planning and Development. Just waiting for the presentation to pull up here. This is TC 1320, outdoor bar seating in the NX district. This item is coming back to you from your meeting last month where the public hearing was rescheduled to tonight. So I'll just run briefly through the presentation to reintroduce the item. It is specific to bars and specifically those bars in the NX district. Just briefly, history again, this was authorized in July of 2020. Spent some time at the Safe, Vibrant, Healthy Community Committee and subsequently authorized. Bars in NX, bars were introduced as an allowable limited use in NX through a text change done in 2015 that prohibited live performances and dance floors, as well as limiting the seating to no more than 8 outdoor seats. So what this text change would do would increase that number from 8 up to 20. It would allow seating in excess of 20 seats with the issuance of a special use permit by the Board of Adjustment after a quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing. The Board of Adjustment, in addition to their typical findings, would also have to find that the proposed outdoor seating is at least 100 feet from essentially any residential structure in a residential district. However, the board could find, under certain circumstances, that distance could be reduced to as close as 40 feet provided some limited or some screening and landscaping is provided, or the seating is wholly screened by the actual building itself if the residential use is across the street, or if the in a kind of courtyard scenario where the building screens the seating. In those instances, the screening along shared property lines will be a type B1 protective yard. It's essentially a 6.5 foot solid wall. It also has with 20 feet of landscaping behind that, including shade trees, understory trees, and shrubbery. In the case of a street protective yard, that would either be a C1 or C2 yard, and those range from 5 to 10 feet depending on whether a fence is used. But again, landscaping in addition to that would be required. The ordinance does not make any changes to lighting standards. However, the code does contain provisions currently that limits maximum foot candles at residential property lines to 0.5 and 2.0 at the street rights of way. There's also standards that prohibit the direct orientation of lighting at adjacent properties. So I hope this graphic is viewable at this scale, but essentially as far as where this, what impacts this text change would have and where it would apply, there's only approximately 17 bars as defined in the NX district. If the text change were adopted, all 17 of those could immediately increase their outdoor seating from 8 to 20. All 17 of those could also petition the Board of Adjustment to increase over 20 seats. However, of those 17, there's only about 7, and those are the red dots you see on the map here, that would be able to, or that would be required to install those screening standards due to their proximity to residential districts. So only about 7 of the 17 are actually within 100 feet of residential structures in a residential zone, and thus would be required to install that additional screening if they chose to locate the seating closer than 100 feet to the residential use. So I hope that helps summarize it, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Okay. Councilmember Knight.
I may have missed this, but under the definition of outdoor, is open air seating considered the same thing as outdoor? Or, if you have 3, vertical walls and a roof, but you have one open, is that considered outdoor, or is that separately defined?
I don't believe it's defined, but I would say that if not fully enclosed, then it would be outdoor.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I will say no one has signed up to speak for or against this, so I am going to open the hearing and close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Melton?
I know this was sort of continued from a prior meeting. We haven't received any comments, I don't recall, since then. It's been unanimously approved by the Planning Commission. So I'm going to go ahead and make a motion. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 5th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text change.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, opposed. Okay, opposed, clerk were Councilmember Cox and Councilmember Fort. All others in favor. Thank you. And next we have text change TC 17A Transit Overlay District. I think this is the one we've all been waiting for. And there is no one signed up to speak for or against. I think you can make this very brief. We're ready to move on this.
Yes, ma'am. TC 17A20 is a transit overlay district. Amending the UDO to revise, basically repeal and replace the existing TOD rules. It's initiated by you almost 1 year ago today. Intent and purpose to allow more housing options, and create walkable streets, encourage affordable housing and employment, and support additional in all modes of transportation. Procedural note, this is kind of step one in a step two process. So should you adopt the UDO amendment tonight, then staff would come forward with a subsequent request to initiate the rezoning and remapping process at an upcoming meeting. These areas will be mapped primarily in mixed-use districts within walking distance to the bus rapid transit corridors. Could potentially be mapped also in residential districts that are directly adjacent to the BRT corridors or stations themselves. And this map shows kind of the potential areas where it may be mapped. The dark green, gray areas show the mixed-use parcels that are within a quarter mile of the BRT corridors. It's my understanding the remapping will start with the western corridor there in yellow, followed by the purple southern corridor. The ordinance makes a number of changes related to the items on the screen. I'll just run through them very briefly. List of prohibited uses includes 1- and 2-family dwellings, although they could be rebuilt if damaged, and I'll discuss that briefly in an upcoming slide. And then other vehicle-oriented uses will be prohibited as well, things like outdoor storage, car sales, those uses with drive-throughs, car washes, and other vehicle-oriented uses. No parking would be required. In a residential development context, a maximum of 2 spaces per dwelling unit would be imposed. Streetscape and block perimeter, the urban limited frontage requirements would apply in the absence of a underlying urban frontage on any property. So that means buildings pulled up to the street. It means no parking, no surface parking between the building and the street. The more urban and pedestrian oriented streetscapes will be required, either the mixed use or main street streetscapes. Exemptions to block perimeter could still be given through the rezoning process, but an applicant would have to demonstrate the need via site plan drawing or other rendering. The amenity area, downtown urban plaza standards that you've recently adopted that typically apply in the DX district would also apply here. And density bonuses will be given at 50%, 50% bonus in story height, provided at least 20% of the units in those additional stories are deemed affordable, and affordable is defined as shown on the screen there for income less than 60% of AMI and for at least 30 years. In fully non-residential developments, the height bonus in stories would be 30%. There'd be a minimum height requirement of 2 stories. In the cases where the TOD is mapped in residential districts, those developments will be allowed to develop under the RX residential mixed use standards. So essentially unit yield will be governed by height maximums only, no minimum lot sizes or minimum lot area or site area per unit requirements. Neighborhood transition would apply only insofar as the Zone A, which is the landscaping and screening from adjacent between mixed use and residential properties, the additional zones B and C, which are the additional use restricted areas with additional building setbacks and height setbacks, would not apply. Tree conservation would only be required on sites greater than 4 acres as opposed to the typical 2, and only environmental primary tree conservation would be required for riparian areas, areas of steep slope, but not the typical thoroughfare screening tree conservation. Commercial use changes, the requirement that commercial uses in RX be placed at the intersection of 2 public streets would be removed. So it could be mid-block. The floor area maximum in OX and RX would be lifted, the 4,000 square foot maximum, although those uses would still have to be in a multi-tenant or multi-use building. And then some additional, finally, some additional non-conforming standards. There's a provision that allows vacated uses to reestablish within a 2-year period as opposed to the typical 1. there's provisions for structures to be demolished and rebuilt, whether the damage is voluntary or involuntary, and provisions that allow for expansion of up to 25% if it complies with the regulations, and over that with a Board of Adjustment approval for of a special use permit. I believe that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions? Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Back to the tree conservation piece. I knew that wasn't going to get by without a question. Tell us why that is. What's the rationale behind lessening or lowering the tree conservation requirements?
So it really comes down to these are smaller sites, and with the goal of increasing density in these corridors. There is little land left after up to 10% of the site being dedicated to tree conservation. There's little land left for housing and workplace uses, which is really the goal of what this text change is trying to achieve in these areas.
Well, okay. I mean, I think we maybe can come around to this from a different avenue, not with this. I know we want to move this forward, but I think there are other policies that we're looking for where we're trying to increase, lower the impervious surface and increase tree canopy and opportunities around tree conservation and preservation. So I think we don't want to lose that because these are going to be some large areas of the city, and so we want to make sure that maybe we can look at a way to incorporate that through a different pathway forward here as we look at tree conservation across the city. Thanks.
Or even preservation of green spaces. I mean, even though this is on transit corridors, you know, we all know that parks, green trees are important for health and climate and shading, respite, all of that. So,
yeah, Madam Mayor, you know, we're looking at our I forgot the word, our heat. We're going through a whole process that you know that this will maybe make worse without a tree conservation or a green space component to it. Green roofs are another possibility here to be looking at, but I think we need to keep that in mind so that our policies are continue to be in line with each other and not incongruent. Thank you.
We did increase the, as I stated, the amenity area requirements. So there is some additional usable open space requirements on these sites in the absence of tree conservation.
okay, thank you. Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, one question I see where single family and duplexes can't be built unless something's damaged and you're rebuilding it. But what about triplexes and quadplexes, which usually have a higher density? Would they be allowed?
Yes, they would be allowed in both the mixed use and residential districts.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cox?
Yeah, I just want to echo Councilmember Knight's concern about the lack of tree canopy. And even though there might be some open space requirements, there are no real requirements for parks or green space. I mean, open space doesn't necessarily have to be green space, I suppose. And so one of the concerns I have is that we will have these very long corridors of brick and concrete, and we talk about unintended consequences. I think that's the unintended consequence of this text change.
I would just note that again, there would be tree conservation would still apply on sites greater than 4 acres. It would still apply along riparian areas, just not kind of the perimeter buffer requirements. There would still be the typical streetscape, street trees required along the street. That's required along any street section in the city as well.
Councilmember Branch?
Yeah, and I do want to remind my fellow council members that there's another process where we actually have to implement and place the TOD. Forgive me if I have background noise. The family just got home. Where we have to place the TOD. So there may be originally when we talked about this, when this was in committee way before the text change, the things that we looked at were mainly focused on non-residential properties. So that's one of the main things that we were considering. So something to consider as we move forward, that we still have another step where once we create this zoning, we now have to place it. And that's a whole different process.
Okay. All right. Well, as I indicated previously, there's a lot of interest in this. I'm trying to remember if I opened the hearing, but I'll open the hearing and close it. And just asking if there is a vote or motion. Mayor Pro Tem Stewart?
I move to adopt. Yes, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 5th, 2021, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text amendment with the adoption and effective date described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Council member Melton has seconded. All in favor, please raise your hands. All right. Anyone opposed? Councilmember Cox is opposed. Clerk? Okay. Thank you. Got through a lot tonight. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. And we'll be back for our work session next week. I wanted to remind everybody that we are going to have our study group on elections. That issue before us at the work session. We will allow public comment. We're going to do lightning round, 1 minute a person, just to kind of comment and provide some feedback. This will be the initial feedback we receive. There will be additional opportunities for public comment and engagement. Gail, on our website, where can people find the sign up?
I believe it is the same place the sign up for regular council is. I haven't seen it yet. This came about while we were meeting, but I think it's the same website.
Okay.
Anybody know any different?
Mayor, it should be on the same website, the same method, public comment, same time frame too.
Okay. All right. And we will, well, I'm sure our communication staff will be pushing this out in different media efforts to alert people through email and other areas. Those who are interested could come speak. Okay. And I am going to ask that time be limited to 1 hour, just in case we get quite a few people. So Gail, you can take that into consideration. Okay. Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, I've been advised earlier that the website for signing up isn't working, that people are receiving messages saying that you cannot sign up at this time.
Yeah,
it goes live tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Tomorrow morning, okay.
It goes live the morning after.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thank you and have a good night.